LoveLore Library. Chapter 89. Shwa, strong winds blew above the clouds. The light scattered to reveal Qin Yu's figure. Magic power surged around him as he floated in the air. Looking back at Immortal Eclipse Valley, he had a deep look on his face. In this place, he had obtained great harvests. His cultivation had advanced to the 5th level of the Golden Core realm, and his storage bag contained countless medicinal pills that he had obtained from the pill disposal department. Just this alone was an unimaginably huge amount of wealth. He had a cheap senior apprentice brother like Pill Crucible, obtained the friendship of Daoist Wang and Jiangli, and even placed a heavy bet on Xing Zhongxiu. Perhaps these might not be of any use now, but they might be of great help to him in the future. In addition, the existence of the radiant redwood and soul mushroom was also an unimaginable harvest. Thinking of this, with a turn of his palm, several great sun mulberry leaves appeared. Qin Yu formed hand seals and its aura spread far into the distance. Suddenly, the buzzing of wings could be heard. A shadow rapidly flew up from the ground. It was the purple-back blue-wing ants. Impressively, the one in the lead was the ant king that Qin Yu had subdued. It stared at the great sun mulberry leaf with excitement. They had already quietly left Immortal Eclipse Valley and were waiting outside for their master to appear. Qin Yu smiled. He fed the great sun mulberry leaf to the ant king. After the ant king finished chewing, it sensed its master's will. It turned around and let out a low cry before flying into Qin Yu's sleeves. In the sleeve of the robe, there was an imperial spirit pouch. Its nature was similar to a storage pouch, and it could provide space for spiritual insects to live in. This item was extremely precious. Luckily, he had his cheap senior apprentice brother. When Qin Yu asked for it, he reluctantly gave it to him. He had only taken away a 5th of the purple-back blue-wing ants from Immortal Eclipse Valley. With the ant king and the matured great sun mulberry, he could rapidly raise them without emptying out his cheap senior apprentice brother's wealth. Perhaps it wouldn't be long before he became an awe-inspiring spirit cultivator. With a wave of his hand, tens of thousands of purple-back blue-wing ants would fly out. He would be invincible below the nascent soul realm. Taking a deep breath, Qin Yu turned and flew away. In his mind, he suddenly recalled what Pill Crucible had said about those born with good fortune. This name was extraordinary. It didn't belong to yin and yang or the 5 elements. Was this his destiny, or was it related to the little blue lamp? Perhaps the latter was more likely. Before he obtained the little blue lamp, he was nothing more than an ordinary low-level cultivator. It was this treasure that changed his destiny, allowing him to have his current achievements. Qin Yu had a clear understanding of this, so he regarded the little blue lamp as his greatest secret. But, just what was the little blue lamp? It could even reverse the fate of cultivators. Qin Yu paused for a moment before suppressing this thought. So what if he didn't know? He only needed to confirm that the little blue lamp was his supreme treasure. That was enough. Whoosh, Qin Yu vanished. Broken Spirit Mountain. This was the name Qin Yu came up with. It was simple, because the spiritual strength in this mountain range was sparse, almost non-existent. But today, as soon as he entered the range of the mountain range, a strange expression crossed his face. This was because the spiritual strength in the world was fluctuating. Although it was thin, it was actually very pure. What was going on? After thinking about it for a long time, he still couldn't figure out why. He could only attribute this to the tides of heaven and earth energy pouring into this place. The reason he originally chose to establish his cave dwelling here was to avoid being disturbed by the flames of war between the righteous and demonic paths. But recently, the war had calmed down and the recovery of heaven and earth's spiritual strength was a good thing. At the very least, it would be beneficial to the growth of the spiritual plants in the medicine garden. Without thinking about it any further, Qin Yu hurried forwards with all his strength. Soon, the mountain valley appeared in sight. Looking around, he saw that the array formation was operating well. He smiled and stepped forwards, falling into the clouds. His feet landed on the ground. As he looked around at the perfectly grown spiritual plants in the medicine garden, Chin-yu took a deep breath and his smile widened. Indeed, being in one's own territory was the most carefree. Perhaps it was time for him to truly establish his own cave dwelling here. The bamboo dragonfly had exhausted all of its energy. It landed in front of the wooden house. Chin-yu poured in magic power once more and sent it deep into the medicine garden. The room was very clean, which was a bit strange. But Chin-yu saw several three-toed footprints that seemed to have been deliberately left behind. Then, he smiled and cursed it for being slippery. This chicken overlord never missed a single opportunity to show off his achievements. There was no one else that could compare to its innate talent. It wasn't here right now. It was unknown whether it had run off to look for food or perhaps it was soaking in some gentle village, unwilling to leave. With Chin-yu's pills to feed it, this fellow had definitely become a spirit. In this originally barren land of spiritual strength, it was difficult for it to encounter any danger, so Chin-yu was disinclined to think too much about it. Right now, there were still many important matters to attend to. For instance, the radiant red wood, the soul mushroom, and how to settle the purple-back blue-winged ants. The originally ample room was suddenly stretched thin. Luckily, to a cultivator with some success in their cultivation, building a house was a simple matter. Half a day later, several more wooden houses rose from the ground. The area reserved for the medicine garden in the valley was also cleared out. One was for the nest of the purple-back blue-winged ants. One was for the cultivation of spiritual plants. One was for a new alchemy room. The open space was prepared for the radiant red wood. The derived spirit root in his storage bag had been bathed in the light of the little blue lamp for a long time and had accumulated so much energy that it nearly blew itself up. Chin-yu was worried that if he didn't plant it soon, it would really turn into dust when he woke up one day. With a flick of his sleeves, magic power swept away the earth, forming a 10-foot deep pit. Then, Chin-yu carefully took out the derived spirit root from his storage bag. As if sensing the aura of the earth, the quiet derived spirit root suddenly began to twist about in excitement. He opened the jade box and placed the spirit root into the pit. The moment it touched the earth, tiny roots wildly grew on its surface and drilled deep into the earth. The entire root began to grow at an astonishing speed. In several breaths of time, it had reached 10 times its original size and was still growing. A moment later, without Chin-yu needing to do anything, the radiant red wood's derived spirit root had already dug up the earth and buried it. Several tender red leaves broke through the earth. In an hour, they had grown to nearly the height of a person and were like raging flames. The thin spiritual strength between the heavens and earth seemed to be summoned. It gathered from all directions and the spiritual strength in the valley began to rapidly rise. Chin-yu secretly praised. This was truly worthy of being an ancient spiritual plant, the radiant red wood. Its ability to gather spiritual strength far surpassed that of ordinary spiritual plants. Right now, it was only a seedling. Once it reached maturity, it would be able to form a domain just like the main body in Immortal Eclipse Valley. This method of gathering heaven and earth origin energy was truly terrifying. At that time, this mountain valley would become a heavenly paradise for cultivation. After carefully inspecting it, he determined that the radiant red wood was growing well. The massive amount of energy accumulated in its roots hadn't been completely consumed. With the little blue lamps supplementing it in the future, its growth speed would inevitably be astonishing. Chin-yu thought for a moment. Then, he laid down all the arrayed discs in his storage bag in order to prevent others from inadvertently discovering the existence of the radiant red wood. This wasn't Immortal Eclipse Valley, and he didn't have the strength of his cheap senior apprentice brother. If news of the Radiant Redwood's existence were to spread out, he would have no choice but to run away. In the spiritual plant breeding room, the soul mushroom, great sun mulberry, and sky thunder bamboo were all here. Qin Yu ensured that they would bathe in the light of the little blue lamp, but he also felt a bit helpless about the foot of sea blue light. The area it covered was far too small. Even if it grew to 2 feet, it would still be fine. When he saw it swallow pill tribulation, there hadn't been any changes at all. Perhaps in the future, he should find more tribulation thunder to supplement it with nutrients. Qin Yu thought back to how the little blue lamp had been indifferent when he was crossing his golden core tribulation. It was likely that the quality of his pill tribulation was too low, so it disdained to help him. But if he really did create a pill tribulation like the top-grade heaven-mending pill, then without pill crucible to help him, he would absolutely provoke a disaster. Well, he would think about it later. As for why he moved the spiritual plants outside and didn't continue to raise them in his storage bag, in the end it had to do with the revolution of the world and the exchange of energy. The storage bag wasn't a true world. Although the little blue lamp could help the spiritual plants grow and provide them with an incomparably powerful energy, they still needed to absorb the aura of the world itself. This was something that Qin Yu had comprehended in Immortal Eclipse Valley as he meditated on alchemy. The spiritual plants were submissive and didn't say a word. Settling them down was extremely simple, but the purple-back blue-wing ants caused Qin Yu to rack his brains. They simply didn't want to stay in the wooden house. They anxiously flew around, as if they would rush into the spiritual plant breeding room at any moment. The temptation of the great sun mulberry came from their bloodline instinct. Even the ant king couldn't avoid it. The pitiful radiant redwood was left all alone in the valley. Not a single purple-back blue-wing ant was willing to look at it again. If the radiant redwood had a spirit, it feared that its eyes would be red and swollen from crying. Qin Yu suddenly had an idea. He connected the spiritual plant breeding room to the ant house. The aura of the great sun mulberry flowed in and the purple-back blue-wing ants immediately calmed down. Through communicating with the ant king, Qin Yu made a new discovery. It turned out that the purple-back blue-wing ants only needed to swallow great sun mulberries when they were advancing. Normally, absorbing the aura of the great sun mulberry was enough for them to grow. This caused Qin Yu to relax a little. Otherwise, he would have had a bit of a headache. How would he provide enough food for the rapidly expanding purple-back blue-wing ant colony? Creak, Qin Yu pushed open the door and walked out. He stretched his waist and took a deep breath of the air filled with spiritual strength. A light smile appeared on his face. Suddenly, the fog outside the valley began to tumble. The newly buried arrayed disk displayed its imprisoning function. A familiar voice sounded out from the fog. It was panic-stricken and no longer had any of its usual pretentiousness. Gwa! 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 Qin Yu shook his head. He really began to wonder just what kind of breed this fellow was. As a wild chicken, how could it make such a misunderstood sound? With a flick of his sleeves, the strength of the arrayed disk dissipated. A gust of wind blew past, rolling up large amounts of chicken feathers. The chicken overlord was still panic-stricken. It plopped to the ground, its buttocks stuck up high and its 2 wings pressed together as it begged for mercy. This series of movements was extremely familiar. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed as if it had been trained. Qin Yu didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. After not seeing it for a period of time, this fellow's amusing attributes had risen dramatically. He held back a smile and said, "Tell me, where did you train in these movements?" The chicken overlord fiercely looked up. The moment it saw Qin Yu, its face and its eyes revealed a mix of pleasant surprise, grievance, sadness, excitement, sadness. It was hard to believe that as a chicken, it could have such a rich range of emotions. Of course, the most common emotion was that my backer has finally returned. I want to see who dares to bully me now. It crawled up and flapped its wings. The chicken overlord flew over with tears in its eyes. Then, in the next moment, it really couldn't help but cry. A pale purple shadow rushed out, ruthlessly smashing into the chicken overlord's head and sending it flying away. Its fiery red crown immediately swelled up and tears streamed down its face. The Ant King landed on Qin Yu's shoulder. As it combed its wings, it glanced at Qin Yu from the corner of its eyes. Its arrogance and disdain caused the chicken overlord's lungs to explode with rage. Guo, what the hell are you? Guo, that is my place. Guo, before I get angry, hurry up and screw off. Chapter 90. The Ant King was furious. With a wang sound, it flapped its wings. Where did this country bumpkin come from, actually daring to be rude to this great king? In the end, the chicken overlord was utterly defeated and was miserably beaten up. If it weren't for Qin Yu secretly ordering him to hold back, he would have lost at least half his chicken life. Perhaps because it felt that it had been humiliated, the chicken overlord suddenly began to work hard. Every day, it woke up early and slept late, absorbing the essence of the sun and moon. It was as if it were training hard in order to wash away its shame. Qin Yu was slightly comforted by this. But several days later, he discovered that the chicken overlord had sneakily snuck into the ant house. He didn't know what methods it used, but it quickly mixed in with the Ant King and became good friends. Then, a certain blind wild wolf was caught by the Ant King and its subordinates and taught a lesson. The chicken overlord looked down from high above. It glanced at Qin Yu, as if saying, "Tremble, foolish mortal. This overlord has so many tricks up his sleeves. Is that something you can imagine?" Qin Yu stopped the chicken overlord from continuing its rampage. He looked at the lone wild wolf and said, "I let you go once and yet you still dare to come back. Do you think I won't kill you?" The wild wolf whimpered as it knelt down and kowtowed. Qin Yu frowned. "You want to stay?" Wild wolf nodded repeatedly. The chicken overlord immediately exploded. It jumped up and down and screamed non-stop, baring its teeth at the wild wolf. If it could speak, it would have definitely cursed the wild wolf. Qin Yu suddenly had a thoughtful look. The chicken overlord quickly stopped, clearly nervous. Qin Yu lifted a hand and pointed. "During this time, have you often disciplined it?" The wild wolf looked up at the chicken overlord, its face full of disdain. There was no need for him to nod his head. His attitude was convincing enough. The chicken overlord was driven mad. During the time that Qin Yu was gone, it was simply a nightmare. That damned, despicable wild wolf, for some unknown reason, had suddenly become much fiercer than before, and had even carried out inhumane tortures on it. Although it did not truly harm its body, the damage to its soul was even more serious. It couldn't stay, absolutely couldn't stay. But it was clear that the chicken overlord didn't have the authority to decide. Qin Yu's lips curled up. "Good. From now on, you will stay here and help me look after the medicine garden." The wild wolves prostrated themselves respectfully. From then on, a new scene appeared in the valley, a chicken and a wolf confronting each other. Of course, most of the time, it was the former's provocation that caused the latter's disdain, or the latter's anger caused the former to flee. It added some fun to the boring cultivation life in the valley. Wild Wolf changed his position so that he could lie down more comfortably. Basking in the warm sunlight, he felt warm all over and did not want to move. "It's been a long time since I've had such a good rest." I haven't lived long, so how could I have thought of the word, a long time? It blinked its eyes and gritted its teeth helplessly. It thought to itself, here we go again. Recently, I've been thinking of something inexplicably and coming up with some messy ideas that don't make sense. Is it because I didn't rest well? As a wild wolf that was born and raised here, it was well aware that Severed Spirit Mountain was lacking in spiritual strength and that it would greatly affect its cultivation. More than once, it had thought of leaving this place and seeing the outside world. It would also find a place that was truly suitable for it to cultivate. But every time it reached the edge of the mountain range, it would feel restless and restless. Then, it would feel regret and finally turn back, giving up on the idea of leaving. After this happened several times, the wild wolf mocked itself for being a good-for-nothing fellow and gave up on the idea of leaving. But water flowed downwards and wolves walked upwards. It was also a wolf that had its own ideals and pursuits. Even if it was difficult to leave its homeland, it still hoped that it could become stronger. This mysterious mountain valley and the powerful master of the valley had allowed the wild wolf to see hope, so it had come here. But the result was that this place was even better than it had imagined. There was an abundance of spiritual strength and the pills that were handed out were simply unimaginably perfect. No wonder that hateful chicken had risen in strength so quickly. Humph, but it still wasn't as strong as this Lord Wolf. Now that I have become Master Spirit Pet, I will become more and more formidable in the future. That damn chicken can forget about being fierce. The wild wolf's claws scratched the wound on its face. This was left behind from the great battle between the chicken and the wolf. One of its eyes had also been pecked blind in that battle. If one had to say that the enmity of the blind eye was absolutely irreconcilable. It wasn't like it was some benevolent wolf girl, so how could it not bite that chicken to death after such a long time? Thinking about it, it might be that it liked this state even more. It seemed that it should have only one eye to begin with. Hissed, it comfortably sucked in a deep breath of air filled with spiritual strength. The wild wolf shook its fur, thinking about how this old man was a one-eyed black-skinned man in the past. Just how majestic and awe-inspiring was that? It began to have random thoughts again, but a one-eyed black-skinned man seemed like a good choice. The wild wolf's eyes brightened. It turned around and stood up. It glanced at the chicken that had been frightened by its actions and curled its lips as it proudly walked away. Soon after, the wild wolf's blind eye was replaced with a piece of black skin. The edges were rough, as if it had been bitten off. But even so, it really did seem a bit more powerful. The chicken overlord curled its lips and rolled its eyes. But it couldn't suppress the envy in its heart. It thought to itself that if this fellow dressed up like this, he would actually be able to compare with this overlord in terms of appearance. But no matter how much you dressed up, that was only your appearance. In terms of inner strength and temperament, this overlord would still crush you into dregs. Qin Yu only considered the open and hidden struggles of his spirit pets as a way to spice up his life. He soon suppressed these thoughts and continued with his next task. He wanted to cultivate the 5-element sword array. This was something he had already decided upon in Immortal Eclipse Valley. Although he couldn't solve the problem of magic power sources for the time being, he could still carry out the basic preparations. The 5-element sword array's root lay in the sword. Even if he successfully cultivated it, he would need 5-element magic swords in order to use it. Metal, water, wood, fire, earth, these were the source of the world's 5 elements. In some ancient cultivation texts, these were the basic attributes that formed the world and all living beings. Metal and water attributes. He temporarily lacked materials to refine magic swords, so he could put them aside for now. Wood attribute. Qin Yu had many choices. For instance, Sky Thunder Bamboo or Great Sun Mulberry. As for Radiant Red Wood, although it was also a wood attribute, its purer and more formidable aspect was its surging fire elemental power. Thus, Qin Yu decided to use Radiant Red Wood to refine a fire attribute magic sword. Wood attribute, he chose Sky Thunder Bamboo. The reason was simple. Sky Thunder Bamboo naturally contained thunder laws. When the 5 elements were combined together, it could display the power of thunder. In the future, if the 5-element sword array reached perfection, it might have wonderful uses when combined with thunder laws. Taking a step back, even if it wasn't related to the 5 elements, it would still be good to have another kind of thunder power. Within the 5-element sword diagram, there were detailed records of refining a magic sword. Jiang Li's experienced Jade Slip also mentioned this. Qin Yu carefully read through and meditated on it. After several days, he determined that he understood everything and then began. The radiant redwood hadn't been planted for long. Even with the little blue lamp, it was still in the seedling stage. If he cut off the branches to refine a magic sword, it wouldn't be appropriate. Thus, he first used the Sky Thunder Bamboo as an experiment. Reality proved that refining a 5-element magic sword was very simple. It was far less difficult than Qin Yu imagined. After cutting off a section of the Sky Thunder Bamboo's trunk, he stimulated his magic power with a law formula and crushed it into the shape of a sword. Then, he branded it with a trace of his divine sense, and the wood attribute magic sword was basically complete. All that was left was to nourish it with magic power in the future, enhance the quality of the magic sword, and strengthen the divine sense mark. There wasn't any pressure and there weren't any accidents. Qin Yu even felt a little absent-minded. The infamous and ominous 5-element sword array sword was actually so simple. In fact, the difficulty of cultivating the 5-element sword array lay in the word cultivation. Before this, it was mentioned that it was extremely simple to cross the threshold. The 5 magic swords were the foundation to cross the threshold, so it was reasonable that it wasn't too difficult to refine. Moreover, there was Qin Yu himself. He had a 5th-level golden core cultivation and his true strength was comparable to a peak golden core. His divine sense was powerful enough, so refining it wasn't difficult at all. Moreover, there was the material used to refine the Sky Thunder Bamboo. As an ancient spiritual plant that had lived for over 10,000 years, its quality had been thoroughly reborn. It was extremely suitable for refining a wood attribute magic sword. Combining all of these factors together, Qin Yu's perception was far too simple. But no matter what, it was still a good thing that the magic sword could be smoothly refined. Qin Yu carefully nourished it according to the 5-element sword diagram and then placed the magic sword in his storage bag. With everything going smoothly, he had plenty of time. After thinking for a moment, Qin Yu didn't immediately go into seclusion to cultivate. Instead, he continued to meditate on the 5-element sword diagram. The great 5-element sword array in Immortal Eclipse Valley had evolved from the 5-element sword diagram. Qin Yu didn't have the wealth, boldness, or methods to do so, but he should be able to arrange a simplified version of the 5-element sword array. The radiant redwood had taken root here and several precious spiritual plants were also in the valley. In terms of safety, he had to be a bit more cautious in order to avoid any accidents. Once he succeeded, with the purple-back blue-wing ants guarding the valley, the safety of the valley would rise. After studying for several days, Qin Yu began to work. But the difficulty of arranging the array formation still surpassed his imagination. He failed several times and even caused a backlash from the array formation strength, leaving him in a distressed state. After trying for nearly 10 days, he finally managed to barely complete it. On the surface, the valley didn't seem any different from the past. Clouds and fog still lingered around it, but once someone intruded, the magic swords hidden within would attack. That's right, to imitate the 5-element sword array, one naturally needed magic swords. What Qin Yu used was the leftover Sky Thunder Bamboo branch that he had refined into a wood attribute magic sword. Even if it was just a tiny section, it was still a 10,000-year-old spiritual plant and of high quality. There were a total of 36 small magic swords. When they released the power of thunder, when superimposed together, it would be quite formidable. Thinking of this, Qin Yu blushed red. That's right, his imitation of the five-element sword array didn't have anything to do with the five elements at all. His attack methods all relied on thunder, and this was the attribute of the Sky Thunder Bamboo. He had to put studying array formations on the agenda. But no matter what, with the protection of this array formation, Qin Yu could cultivate in peace for the time being. He coughed and flicked his sleeves as he returned to his room. He ignored the wild wolf's dull eyes and the chicken overlord's undisguised disdain. There were still many pills refined by Immortal Eclipse Valley's pill disposal department. The wild wolf basked in the sun. It occasionally swept its eyes around, and after a brief daze, it bared its fangs. The chicken overlord glared at it like a tiger watching its prey. If there was a chance, it would encourage the Ant King to teach some eyesore bastard a lesson. Unfortunately, the Ant King had already received Qin Yu's orders. While it was playing around, it also accepted the offered pills and began to play around. The chicken overlord frowned inwardly, but it still maintained a smile on the surface. As it thought back to its carefree life in the past and then looked at its current predicament, it couldn't help but secretly shed tears of sadness. Like this, time quietly passed. Hoot's strong winds rose up from the ground. The rich heaven and earth origin energy in the valley suddenly revolved and gathered towards the wooden house. Shua, Qin Yu's eyes flashed open, a sharp light exploding from them. Golden Core, 6th level. As he felt the powerful magic power rushing through his body, he smiled. Chapter 91. Whoosh, whoosh, the forest was mottled with light and shadows. Two gray shadows were moving at an astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, they were already dozens of feet away. Upon closer inspection, it was a man and a woman. They were both handsome and beautiful, and their clothes were extraordinary. However, at this moment, they looked battered and exhausted. Wang Zifeng's arm was hit, and it was unknown what kind of weapon caused the wound. Black gas lingered around the wound, and blood flowed out. He swallowed the sex healing pills, but it couldn't stop the bleeding. His face was pale, and his eyes, which used to be full of confidence and pride, couldn't help but reveal fear. From time to time, he would turn his head to look back in panic. Beside him, although Yun Shuoqing's face was also pale, she was barely able to maintain her calm. At the very least, she wasn't as pathetic as him. Wang Zifeng gasped for breath, gritted his teeth, and growled, "Damn it, these people from the Devil Dao actually dare to chase after us. I'll definitely pay them back double in the future." Yun Shuoqing sighed inwardly. If he had the strength to do this, he might as well use it to escape. Suddenly, the view in front of the two suddenly widened. A large cloud appeared in front of them, completely enveloping the entire valley between the steep cliffs. Yun Shuoqing was surprised. There were actually cultivators living in seclusion here. At such a close distance, she could clearly sense the faint fluctuations of the array formation in the clouds. After a brief pause, a look of hesitation appeared on her face. Wang Zifeng's eyes suddenly lit up. Great! There is a fellow cultivator living in seclusion here. You and I can use the formation to temporarily hide, and we will definitely be able to repel the devil cultivator. He took a step forward and flew into the clouds. Yun Shuoqing bit her lips and followed. Shua, as soon as he entered, a restrictive force descended upon him. It wasn't very strong, and he felt as if he was wrapped in a layer of mud. Wang Zifeng shouted, "Which fellow Daoist is living in seclusion here?" "I am Wang Zifeng of the Jiang sect. I have encountered some trouble with my companions. I'll have to trouble Master to open the formation and let us temporarily hide." No response. Yun Shuoqing said, "Perhaps Master isn't here." Wang Zifeng furrowed his eyebrows. This is a critical moment. I can't care about anything else. Junior apprentice Sister Shueching, please wait a moment. Once I break this array formation, we can talk inside. With a wave of his hand, he took out an item that was as blue as a water droplet. As he injected his magic power into it, it released layers of watercolored halos that quickly spread through the fog. Wang Zifeng relaxed a little. This treasure of his was called the River Heart Droplet, and it was a famous magic tool that could break through barriers and array formations. If he abandoned this treasure and borrowed the power of the array formation here, he should be able to stop the demonic cultivators behind them for a moment. At that time, he and Yun Shueching would be able to retreat. That's right, from the very beginning, he had the idea of taking the opportunity to escape. As a core disciple of the Jiang sect, the Jin Dan Dao was just around the corner. His life was extremely precious, so how could he take the risk here? As for what kind of trouble this would cause for the cultivators living in seclusion here, it was not within Wang Zifeng's consideration. Consider yourself unlucky to meet him. Yun Shueching frowned. Senior apprentice brother Wang, isn't this a bad idea? Wang Zifeng didn't even turn his head. When this matter is over, I will come to apologize and express my gratitude. The prerequisite was that the cultivator was still alive. Looking at the power of this formation, the person who set it up should have an average cultivation base. It would be quite difficult for him to struggle and survive in the face of the rage of the fiendish cultivators. Yun Shueching hesitated for a moment, but in the end she didn't say anything. After all, she was also the one running for her life. But Wang Zifeng's performance had already drawn a giant cross in her heart. As she thought about the marriage that her father had mentioned, Yun Shueching felt that it was best to consider this at length. The fog trembled and fluctuations began to appear. Wang Zifeng was overjoyed. It's done. But at this time, a sudden change occurred. Whoosh, whoosh, with the sound of breaking air, the fog violently tumbled, as if something were rapidly approaching. Before Wang Zifeng's complexion could change, the purple thunder arrived. The River Heart Droplet was essentially a water attribute treasure. Facing the power of thunder, it wasn't able to resist at all. With a pitiful cry, Wang Zifeng's robes were scorched black and smoke rose up from his body. His neatly combed hair was like withered grass that pierced the heavens. It was a miserable sight. Yun Shueching cried out, "Senior, please show mercy." To be able to move such a formidable power of thunder into an array formation, one could imagine just how profound his cultivation was. She cursed inwardly, thinking that Wang Zifeng had misled others and himself. Shwa, the lightning scattered and 36 sword phantoms appeared in the fog. They immediately turned around and left. Yun Shueching relaxed. Luckily, the master of this place wasn't some cruel and ruthless individual, otherwise it wouldn't be wrong for him to directly kill them. To forcefully break through an array formation without an invitation, that was already enough to kill a cultivator. The fog parted to the sides and a figure stepped forwards. Yun Shueching gathered her thoughts. Just as she was about to bow, her eyes widened and shock filled her face. Beside her, the charcoal-headed Wang Zifeng also revealed a mouthful of white teeth, as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Fellow Daoist Yun Shueching, why are you here? The charcoal-headed person beside her had already been automatically ignored. When they were beneath the radiant redwood, although he hadn't said much, he had still heard everything clearly. Moreover, this brat had tried to break through his array formation, how hateful. Qin, fellow Daoist Qin Yu. Wang Shueching cried out, "You're still alive." As she spoke, her face flushed red. She waved her hands again and again. "I'm sorry, that's not what I meant." Qin Yu smiled. "Some things happened, so I'm living quite well." But at this time, he frowned. Outside the valley, a cold and gloomy roar sounded out. Those inside, listen up. Hand over those 2 cultivators that escaped, otherwise no one will be left alive today. Yun Xueqing revealed an awkward expression. Qin Yu's thoughts raced and he immediately guessed what was going on. He looked at Wang Zifeng, his eyes so cold that they caused a chill to crawl up his back. This brat actually wanted to divert the disaster to someone else. If it weren't for Yun Xueqing, he wouldn't have cared about whether he lived or died. You 2 go in first. I'll deal with him. With a flick of his sleeves, the power of the array formation drew the 2 into the valley. Wang Zifeng and Yun Xueqing landed on the ground, but their surroundings were blurry. It was clear that Qin Yu had deliberately left behind the power of the array formation so that they couldn't see what was happening in the valley. It's actually Qin Yu. I don't think he can last much longer. Junior apprentice Sister Xueqing, we should hurry up and think of a way to leave. Wang Zifeng said in a low voice. His eyes couldn't help but look towards the blurry depths of the valley. Yun Xueqing frowned. She said, Senior apprentice Brother Wang, fellow Daoist Qin has already helped us resist a powerful enemy. That is already a great favor, so how could he run away without saying goodbye? Even if fellow Daoist Qin isn't a match, if the 3 of us join forces we might be able to fight. Wang Zifeng revealed an embarrassed expression. He took several steps forwards. Senior apprentice Brother Wang, since fellow Daoist Qin Yu doesn't want us to see what is happening in the valley, we shouldn't act rashly. Bang! There was a loud explosion in the fog above their heads. Deep purple thunder spread outwards. With a miserable scream, a charred man fell to the ground, twitching. Wang Zifeng shrank back. He had just tasted the power of purple thunder, so he had a good understanding of its taste. He had no idea where Qin Yu had obtained this treasure, but it was actually able to control such a formidable power of thunder. To be able to deal with such a powerful demonic cultivator, he really had some dog's hit luck. Thinking of this, a trace of jealousy flashed in his eyes. Of course, he hid it well so that no one could sense it. Yun Xueqing was pleasantly surprised. Thank you, fellow Daoist Qin. Qin Yu waved his hand. It was nothing. But why was this demonic cultivator chasing you down? Wang Zifeng interjected, we inadvertently angered him so we were chased down. Looking at Yun Xueqing's complexion, it was clear that things weren't as simple as they seemed. However, Qin Yu had only casually asked without any intention of delving deeper into the matter. As he saw Wang Zifeng's fearful expression, he frowned inwardly. He turned to Wang Xueqing. Miss Yun, are you going to stay here and recuperate, or do you plan to do something else? Wang Zifeng quickly winked at Yun Xueqing. Yun Xueqing hesitated for a moment and said, let's go. If we stay, we might cause trouble for fellow Daoist Qin. After all, the information was obtained by the 2 of them. Since Wang Zifeng was unwilling, it was not good for her to say anything more. Qin Yu nodded. That's also good. Then I will open the array formation and send you 2 out. With a flick of his sleeve, a passageway appeared in the fog outside the valley. The 2 thanked him and left. Qin Yu looked at the unconscious man on the ground. He frowned for a moment before composing himself. In the end, it wasn't a good idea to randomly kill people. Let's wait for him to wake up before making a decision. However, when he thought about how his peaceful seclusion had been disrupted by this accident, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. Sure enough, man proposes but God disposes. There are always accidents in the world. But Qin Yu never expected that the accidents he would encounter would be far more than this. He tossed the unconscious demonic path cultivator to the side and returned to his room to cultivate. Before he had finished refining several pills, his eyes flashed open. A sharp light exploded. He stood up. Light flashed around him and he flew out of the wooden house. The wild wolf's lone eye flashed with a cold light. It arched its back and stared upwards. Its long fur stood up like steel needles as it howled without end. The chicken overlord's performance was far too humiliating. It slumped to the ground, its wings shivering as it held its head. Within the ant room, the sound of wings beating rang out. With just a thought, Qin Yu could fly out to meet the enemy. Wang Zifeng's face was drained of blood, as if his parents had died. His heart was filled with fear. All he could think of was that he could not die, he could not die. When that valley appeared in front of him, he clenched his teeth and said in a low voice, "Junior apprentice Sister Xueqing, if you want to live, then don't say anything. Leave everything to me." There was still blood at the corners of Yun Xueqing's lips. She hesitantly looked at him and then slowly nodded. Wang Zifeng loudly said, "Seniors, it's right here." He pointed a finger. "The person in the valley knows us. After he took away the jade slip, he drove us away. Now, the jade slip is on his body. Moreover, I am sure that there must be some unrivaled treasure in this valley. If seniors manage to obtain some harvests, I ask that you show mercy and spare our lives." Yun Xueqing's eyes widened and her face flushed red. "Senior apprentice Brother Wang, Junior apprentice Sister Xueqing, please rest assured that I am not speaking nonsense. Although you and I weren't able to clearly see what was hidden in the valley just now, I know that Qin Yu made a mistake. I once inadvertently refined the soul of a spirit-searching mouse, so I am extremely sensitive to spiritual strength. If the heaven and earth spiritual strength in the valley is gathering by itself, then there must be some precious treasure within." Wang Zifeng bowed again and again. "Seniors, everything I say is the truth. You will understand once you see it." The middle-aged man with the thin face and small eyes smiled. "To sell out your savior so thoroughly, even in my demonic path it is rare to see someone like you. Brat, you have great potential. Very well, as long as what you say is true and you haven't leaked out any information, then I will spare your life." Wang Zifeng was overjoyed. "All right, since we found the master, let's not waste any more time. My disciple's life or death is still unknown," Gu Xingping coldly said. He stepped forwards, the aura of a 7th-level golden core erupting. Heaven and earth spiritual strength turned into a strong wind, wanting to tear apart the fog like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. Shwa, the fog parted and Qin Yu's feet landed in the void, as if he had stepped onto a long flight of stairs. His face was expressionless as he coldly looked around. He lightly said, "You all came without an invitation. Do you want to sit in front of my door and discuss the Tao?" His aura was condensed, restrained without a trace. Although it seemed weak and small, it also felt like a boundless sea, unfathomably deep. Gu Xingping's complexion changed. The 2 men and 1 woman behind him also revealed looks of surprise. They clearly never imagined that there would be a master living in seclusion in this wilderness. This wasn't a hasty conclusion. If this person could remain so calm and indifferent in front of the 4 of them, then he was naturally a master. And masters were worthy of respect. His eyes swept around and fell on Warbear. "With your cultivation, you are attacking a junior. Isn't that a bit too much?" With the aura of a 9th-level Jin Dan, the weight of his words was extremely heavy. Everyone instantly fell silent. Wang Zifeng hatefully glared at Yun Xueqing. He thought to himself, "You bitch, you actually wanted to kill me with a single strike. Now, let's see just how you'll beg me." With Uncle Chio's arrival, his cultivation was more than enough to suppress everyone present. He wanted to see just how rampant these demonic path cultivators could be. Warbear frowned and took a step back. Chio-he's expression became even more calm. The auras of these people in front of him were not weak, and he didn't want to provoke them. But now, it seemed that these people were also afraid of him. This was good. There wasn't any deep hatred between them, so it was fine to just talk things out. There was no need to make such a big fuss. With a light cough, just as he was about to say some pleasantries and bring the matter back to the main topic, his complexion suddenly changed. Bang! Warbear stepped forwards, the ground collapsing. He took a step back just in time to gather his strength. At this time, his attack was like a river bursting through a dam, like an erupting mountain flood, fierce to the extreme. His fist came out with the momentum of 1,000 caddies. He roared out in anger. He raised his palms and magic power surged outwards. But, he had underestimated the strength contained in this fist. With a muffled sound like thunder, the clothes on his arms were instantly torn apart by the strength, revealing countless red lines on his skin. These were the tiny blood vessels in his body that had been ruptured by the formidable strength. The ground beneath his feet collapsed and he was forced back again and again. Every step he took caused crushed stones to fly into the air, mixed with a terrifying strength that caused the air to howl. Although he was shocked by his opponent's strength, as long as he had the time to blink his eyes, he would be able to revolve his magic power to stabilize himself and then launch a fatal counterattack. But after Warbear, Gu Xingping lifted a hand and drew in the void. In the blink of an eye, a talisman was formed. It flew out and fell onto Qiuhe's body. This talisman didn't have much killing power, but it had a sealing power. Its stronger function was to disturb the magic power within a cultivator's body, making it difficult for them to revolve. The magic power that wasn't flowing smoothly to begin with suddenly stagnated after being attacked by the talisman. Qiuhe stiffened, revealing a fatal flaw. Daoist Wuyuan stepped forwards. Black light overflowed from the ground, wriggling like a living creature as it drilled into his body. Qiuhe's eyes instantly darkened and his face twisted with pain. The last female cultivator flicked her sleeves. The red ribbon flashed like lightning, but it seemed to be even more red than before. Puff! Blood broke through the skin of his neck and his head was cut off, blooming like a gorgeous flower. 9th level golden core Qiuhe had died. And at this time, Warbear's figure came to a sudden stop. Slaughter energy rose up from his body. He turned around, his eyes locking onto Qinyu. Qinyu narrowed his eyes. His expression was dignified, but he didn't feel any fear. Time seemed to pause for several breaths of time. Warbear let out a deep breath. As if it were some sort of signal, the pressure in the air that caused one's heart to tremble began to quietly disperse. He cupped his hands together and smiled. Things happened too suddenly. I hope fellow Daoist Qin doesn't blame me. Qinyu had an indifferent expression. Is this a warning that everyone is giving me? Gu Xingping suddenly sneered. So what if it is? The relaxed atmosphere suddenly tensed up. Qinyu's eyes were cold. Then everyone, feel free to give it a try. His aura didn't change, but a trace of slaughter energy gushed out. It was thin and dense, causing several people to feel a chill run down their backs. If this slaughter intent could make them feel such dread, then it must have been condensed from killing cultivators of the same level. Moreover, there had been many of them, there was definitely more than one. Warbear hurriedly said, "This is a misunderstanding. Fellow Daoist Qin, please don't think too much about it." Gu Xingping's expression darkened. He coldly snorted and no longer spoke. Puff! Qiuhe's corpse fell to the ground. The smell of blood wafted through the air. Wang Zifeng, who had just recovered a bit of his spirit, sat where he was in a daze, as if he had lost his soul. As if sensing everyone's eyes on him, he shook and regained his composure. He began to weep, "Don't kill me, don't kill me." Warbear frowned. He lifted a hand and slapped out. Wang Zifeng's head exploded and he followed in Qiuhe's footsteps, accompanying him in the Yellow Springs. Gu Xingping licked his lips. There's still one more. But killing such a beautiful woman would be a waste. I might as well enjoy her. Yun Shuaching paled. Qin Yu lightly said, she is my friend. You cannot touch her. Gu Xingping's face twitched. His eyes were cold and gloomy. Qin Yu, don't push your luck. Qin Yu was expressionless. I will kill anyone who dares to touch her. Daoist Wu Yuan smiled. Fellow Daoists, please calm down. She is just a baby girl, so what does it matter if you kill her or not? Let's first see if the jade slip is intact. War Bear nodded. Yes. He rummaged through Wang Zifeng's headless corpse and found a jade slip. After probing it, he smiled. The seal is still there. Daoist Wu Yuan turned around. The seal is still there. These two juniors clearly don't know what's inside. If that's the case, then fellow Daoist Gu might as well be merciful and let this baby girl go. Gu Xingping flicked his sleeves and turned around. War Bear said, fellow Daoist Qin, this baby girl can be spared, but you must guarantee that she won't tell anyone about what happened today. Qin Yu lightly said, when you killed her, I didn't interfere. The implication was that if this matter were to spread out, it wouldn't benefit him in the least. He turned and said, Miss Yun, I wonder if I can keep you as a guest in my valley for a period of time. Yun Shuaching had a grateful look in her eyes. She quickly said, of course. For the next month, I won't take half a step out of the valley. War Bear and Wu Yuan's complexions relaxed. In a month, this matter should have ended long ago. So what if this girl spoke of Qiu He and Wang Zifeng's deaths? In these past years, they had already killed many people. Of the four, the only female cultivator suddenly said in a soft voice, fellow Daoist War Bear, do you think fellow Daoist Qin can participate in what happens next? War Bear smiled. Fairy Maiden is thinking the same thing as me. But this matter still requires the four of us to agree. Daoist Wu Yuan's eyes flashed. I have no opinion. He looked at Gu Xingping. Brother Gu, the overall situation is the most important. There is no need to haggle over such minor matters. Gu Xingping's complexion darkened. After a long time, he coughed and agreed. War Bear cupped his hands together. Fellow Daoist Qin, we have discovered a treasure land. I wonder if you would like to join us. Of course, there is no guarantee of harvests, but there will definitely be risks. Qin Yu's eyes fell on the jade slip. He hesitated for a moment and then shook his head. I don't want to do anything these days, so I won't compete with you all for benefits. War Bear found it hard to hide his disappointment. But he didn't say much. After exchanging some pleasantries, they bid their farewells and left. As he watched them leave, Qin Yu's taut heart finally relaxed a little. These four people were all at the late Golden Core realm and their eruption of strength was even stronger. With Qin Yu's strength, he didn't have the slightest chance of victory. Of course, it wouldn't be difficult for him to escape unscathed. With the blood escape art, War Bear and the others could only watch helplessly. This was why he had the confidence to act tough. He wouldn't be like Qiu He, a dignified 9th-level Golden Core master of the Southern Empire and Northern Empire. If he lost his life because of a moment of carelessness, he would die an unjust death. Suppressing his thoughts, Qin Yu turned and led the way. Miss Yun, for safety's sake, please. Yun Shuaching closed her eyes, her long eyelashes trembling. I'll have to trouble fellow Daoist Qin to lead the way. This girl's thoughts were quite exquisite. Qin Yu smiled. With a flick of his sleeves, he wrapped her up and stepped into the fog. Gu Xingping's complexion was ugly. He looked around and said, everyone here is a powerful figure, so why must you be so cautious and patient towards that Qin Yu today? Isn't that beneath our status? Daoist Wu Yuan chuckled. Fellow Daoist Gu, why ask a question you already know the answer to? This Qin Yu, he isn't easy to deal with. The female cultivator's clothes fluttered in the wind. Fellow Daoist Qin has killed at least 10 golden cores, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to condense such slaughter energy. Gu Xingping clenched his teeth. So what? If you and I join forces, can't we kill him? Warbear said in a low voice, although we haven't fought, I can confirm that Qin Yu is far more difficult to deal with than that Chiu cultivator. If you and I join forces, we might be able to kill Qin Yu, but there is also a chance of casualties. The current important matter is the most important. I don't think fellow Daoist Gu would want to cause any side issues just because of this. Alright, let's put this matter aside for now. Fellow Daoist Gu, what are your calculations? Gu Xingping took a deep breath. Although I haven't locked onto the entrance, I've already determined the approximate range. It should be within several dozen miles. Give me 3 more days. Warbear nodded. I'll have to trouble fellow Daoist. Gu Xingping revealed a smug expression. Daoist Wu Yuan curled his lips, a flash of contempt in his eyes. Someone who was obsessed with women and didn't have the least bit of subtlety, just how did he manage to survive until today? Whoosh, the group sped away. However, no one discovered that when Gu Xingping turned around, a strange light flashed in his eyes. Chapter 93. Geniuses in a Second to Remember Love. Yun Xueqing stayed in the valley. Luckily, there was still some spare room in the wooden house. This girl was as smart as she appeared. After entering her room, she didn't take a single step out. But thinking about it, Qin Yu controlled the array formation and temporarily hid the radiant red wood. This had nothing to do with trust, but was the most basic precaution a cultivator should have. There was no romance nor was there any story of affection. Besides the time they entered the valley, the two didn't meet again for the next 5 days. This caused a wild chicken that had evil thoughts in its heart to be disappointed. It curled its lips and looked at the wild wolf across from it, feeling great disdain for this fellow's sanctimonious appearance. It was unknown who it was, but when this girl arrived, their eyes lit up. Who knew that a single eye could be so bright? In the blink of an eye, it was the 9th day. In the distance, there was a loud rumbling sound, like a thunderclap. The originally clear skies began to rapidly darken. Strong winds gushed out from the void, tearing through the fog and causing it to tumble about. The chicken overlord shrank its head back in fear. The wild wolf howled towards the heavens. Shua, Qin Yu appeared in the valley. He looked towards the source of the sound, his complexion uncertain. Several powerful auras faintly appeared, giving him a familiar feeling. Without a doubt, they were Warbear, Gu Xingping, and the others. What were they doing? Could it be that the treasure land they mentioned before was at Severed Spirit Mountain? Inexplicably, Qin Yu thought back to the exhaustion of heaven and earth origin energy here as well as the sudden appearance of pure spiritual strength not too long ago. His thoughts raced. Senior Qin, what happened? Yun Xueqing walked out of her room, a worried look on her face. Qin Yu turned and said, I don't know, but it shouldn't be related to us. There's no need to think too much about it. Soon, the winds dispersed and the skies cleared up. But Qin Yu's complexion became dignified. Miss Yun, return to your room first. Yun Xueqing's heart trembled. She turned and left. Shua, Qin Yu shot into the skies. With a wave of his hand, he split apart the fog. His aura tumbled around him, his momentum overwhelming. Outside the valley, it was Warbear and the others. Seeing Qin Yu's ill intent, Daoist Wu Yuan cupped his hands together. Fellow Daoist Qin, please don't be angry. We came without ill intent. Warbear coughed several times. His face paled as if he had been injured. Fellow Daoist Qin, I wonder if you can control some formidable thunder power? Qin Yu nodded. Yes. War Bear was overjoyed. Fellow Daoist Qin, I invite you to join us once more. I won't hide it from fellow Daoist, we've already found the treasure land, but we need the power of thunder to open it. Qin Yu frowned. I said I'm not interested. War Bear said in a low voice, fellow Daoist Qin should understand that we aren't willing to become enemies with you. If you really aren't willing to intervene, then I can only ask fellow Daoist to temporarily leave this place. Daoist Wu Yuan explained, the treasure land we discovered is in these mountains. With fellow Daoist Qin's cultivation, it would be hard for us to feel at ease staying here. Qin Yu remained silent. What these people said was probably true, but it would be naive of them to believe that he could leave easily after rejecting them. What if you come back after you leave? Even if he didn't return, he would still be in big trouble if he were to spread the news. In fact, the meaning was very clear. Either you join or you shed all pretense of cordiality. It was just that this way of expressing it was a little euphemistic. Qin Yu looked up. He lightly said, since everyone is so sincere, if I don't agree then I won't be able to appreciate your kindness. War Bear chuckled. With fellow Daoist Qin joining us, we are like tigers that have grown wings. We will definitely be able to smoothly open the treasure land. The oppressive atmosphere was swept away. Let me formally introduce you. This is fellow Daoist Wu Yuan, fellow Daoist Gu Xingping, and Fairy Xiang. Qin Yu cupped his hands together in greeting. War Bear took out a jade slip. Everything that fellow Daoist Qin wishes to know is within. Qin Yu received it. He frowned. Right now, there are still some matters that I need to deal with. Daoist Wu Yuan smiled. Fellow Daoist Qin can do as he pleases. We also need to rest and reorganize ourselves. How about tomorrow? All right. War Bear and the other three left. Qin Yu stood where he was, his face cloudy for a long time. Then, he turned and flew back into the valley. Miss Yun, I will be going out tomorrow. It would be best if you wait for me to return before you leave. Qin Yu went straight to the point. After I leave, I will open the entire array formation. At that time, Miss can stay in your room and do not casually walk around. Yun Xueqing didn't ask anything else. She nodded in agreement. Qin Yu began to prepare. War Bear and the other three weren't easy to deal with. If he cooperated with them, he had to be extremely cautious. The Soul Mushroom, Great Sun Mulberry, and Sky Thunder Bamboo were all brought away to avoid any accidents. The purpleback bluewing ants were placed into the Imperial Spirit Bag. After absorbing the aura of the Great Sun Mulberry, they had become much stronger. If any accidents occurred, it would be a pleasant surprise. As for the Radiant Redwood, the storage bag had limited space and it was impossible to store its several dozen-foot-tall trunk. In addition, moving it around would harm its growth, so he could only leave it here. However, the power of the Valley Protecting Array formation had already been opened to its strongest state. In addition, there were also the 36 Sky Thunder Bamboo flying swords. If someone were to break in, they might not be able to do anything. Finally, he carefully inspected the storage bag. After making sure that there were all sorts of pills, Qin Yu sat down and took out a jade slip. After carefully probing the jade slip and determining that there was nothing wrong with it, Qin Yu probed it with his divine sense. There was a bit of resistance, but as his divine sense strengthened, it was easily broken. After a long time, Qin Yu opened his eyes, a sharp light surging within them. There was a great deal of information in the jade slip, and many of them were pieced together in a messy manner. To summarize it simply, in ancient times, a nascent soul powerhouse had sealed away his own cave dwelling before he died. After many investigations, this matter was determined to be true. The treasure land that Warbear and the others spoke of was here. A nascent soul cave dwelling. And it was an ancient cultivator. No wonder Warbear and the other three cared so much about it. In order to prevent news of this from leaking out, they didn't hesitate to kill Chiohe. The Southern Empire and Northern Dynasty added together represented a territory of hundreds of thousands of miles. Just how vast and boundless was that? Even though the cultivation world had withered and there were still several hundred golden core cultivators, there were only around 10 nascent soul powerhouses. Even if some hidden old monsters were added in, there were 15 at most. Which golden core didn't want to become a nascent soul? And the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling contained this possibility. Once this matter was revealed, it would inevitably set off endless storms in this part of the world. There might even be a great war between the righteous and demonic paths. Qin Yu took a deep breath and suppressed the shaking in his heart. His eyes brightened. After learning about the nascent soul cave dwelling, his mentality had changed. Since he wanted to intervene, he would do his best. Perhaps to him, this matter was a turning point in his cultivation. Closing his eyes, the magic power within his body revolved according to his will. Qin Yu calmed his mind, striving to reach his peak state. The next day, when the skies were still dark, Warbear and the other three arrived. Shua, the fog parted and Qin Yu stepped out. Gu Xingping looked into the fog. Fellow Daoist Qin, have you put away the treasures? By the time we return, they might have already been stolen clean. Qin Yu lightly said, there's no need to worry about it. This was the feeling of a fish landing on cotton. Gu Xingping paled. Warbear changed the topic. If there's nothing else, let's go. Humph. Gu Xingping was the first to fly away. Daoist Wu Yuan smiled and followed behind. Warbear and Fairy Xiang glanced at each other, a bit of worry in their eyes. Qin Yu was the last. He looked at Gu Xingping's back and frowned. This person's disciple had been severely wounded by him and yet he had been able to patiently endure it, not revealing anything at all. So why did he cause so much trouble afterwards? It was as if he was deliberately trying to antagonize him. Was he overthinking things, or was this Gu Xingping secretly plotting something else? Severed Spirit Mountain was extremely large and the mountain terrain was extremely grim. If a mortal were to climb over it, they might not even be able to climb a single mountain peak in several days. But to a golden core cultivator, 100 miles could be crossed in the blink of an eye. When Gu Xingping stopped, the group of people stood between two large mountains. The mountains were straight like two long spears that pierced into the heavens, exuding a fierce and overbearing aura. The ground was a mess, cracked and scorched black. There was even a 10-foot pit that plunged deep into the ground. As he looked down, he felt a stabbing pain in his eyes. Qin Yu's heart chilled. It seemed that this so-called treasure land wasn't simple at all. Warbear shook his head and bitterly smiled. Yesterday, we suffered a great deal here. Now that we've invited fellow Daoist Qin Yu, there shouldn't be any mistakes. Gu Xingping coldly coughed. That will depend on whether or not his power of thunder is strong enough. Fairy Xiang said in a soft voice, all right, it's about time. Fellow Daoist Gu, you may begin. Gu Xingping smiled. Very well, I will begin. He coldly glared at Qin Yu. Listen to my command and display your thunder. His figure flashed and he flew into the air, just in time to arrive between the two mountains. At this time, the sky was bright but not yet bright. In the east, there was the white of dawn and in the west, there was still a waning moon. Gu Xingping took a deep breath, a solemn expression on his face. He naturally revealed the bearing of a grandmaster. As the light at his fingertips fell into the air, ripples appeared. His movements weren't fast, but they were extremely stable. Every finger he sent out and took back took exactly the same amount of time. As the ripples of light spread out, the white of dawn in the east and the waning moon in the west suddenly brightened. This wasn't an illusion, it was truly releasing light that illuminated the world. Or, it was more accurate to say that there was some invisible strength pulling in the light from a large area and concentrating it in this narrow area. This was because at this time, the area between the two mountains suddenly darkened. Qin Yu was filled with praise. Regardless of what sort of person Gu Xingping was, his cultivation in array formations could be considered outstanding. Chapter 94. Between the two mountains, there was a phantom of a giant wolf. Deep within that malevolent wolf maw was the cave abode of the ancient cultivator's nascent soul. Wisps of pure heaven and earth spiritual energy flowed out from it. Qin Yu's thoughts stirred. He thought about how severed Spirit Mountain was lacking in heaven and earth origin energy, how the array formation spirit stones had lost a great deal of spiritual strength, and how it had suddenly recovered recently. Perhaps all of this was because of this cave abode. War Bear turned around and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, the first one to enter might obtain a decisive opportunity, but there is also a possibility of falling into danger. I am willing to take the lead. Does anyone have any objections?" Gu Xingping said, "I've already broken through the outer formation of the Immortal's Cave, but according to my judgment, there are still dangers inside. Fellow Daoist Xiong has a profound cultivation base and a strong physical body, so you're indeed a suitable candidate." Daoist Wu Yuan and Fairy Xiang hesitated for a moment before nodding. Qin Yu naturally had no objections. War Bear cupped his hands together. "Everyone, let us meet again in our cave dwellings." Whoosh, he soared into the sky and flew into the wolf's mouth without hesitation, disappearing into the darkness. Gu Xingping turned around and said, "Fellow Daoist Xiong, stand firm, and I'll continue breaking the formation. I'll be the second to enter. What do you think?" Daoist Wu Yuan's eyes flashed. "I actually think that fellow Daoist Gu should stay behind so that he can respond to any changes in the array formation and avoid any accidents." Gu Xingping's face darkened and he said coldly, "If that's the case, all of you will leave together. I'll be the last." Fairy Xiang lightly said, "Let fellow Daoist Qin stay with fellow Daoist Gu. That way they can take care of each other." Daoist Wu Yuan nodded. "That's right." Gu Xingping hesitated for a moment before letting out a cold snort and not saying anything else. Qin Yu thought for a moment and nodded. "You too, let's go." Whoosh, whoosh, Daoist Wu Yuan and Fairy Xiang flew away. A strange light flashed in Gu Xingping's eyes. He turned around impatiently. "Later, you'd better follow me closely. Otherwise, don't blame me for not warning you if something happens." Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. "Fellow Daoist Gu, don't worry. I will watch over you." He seemed to be referring to something. Gu Xingping's heart skipped a beat. He snorted and turned his head. "Let's go." Qin Yu's figure moved and he stuck close to Qin Yu's back. On his calm face, he had already concentrated 120% of his concentration. Entering the wolf's mouth, their vision suddenly turned dark, as if all light had been devoured by the wolf. Then, a tearing feeling came from all over his body, extremely fierce. Even with his powerful demon body, he still felt a bit uncomfortable. After several breaths of time, the scenery around him changed and he appeared in a garden. Withered leaves covered the ground. No one had taken care of it all year round, and weeds grew everywhere, destroying the scenery in the garden. Not far away, a rock garden was covered by vines, revealing only a few edges, which were mottled. Daoist Wu Yuan and Fairy Xiang were several dozen meters away. There were several broken vines on the ground, their complexions grim. Seeing Qin Yu arrive, his eyes brightened for a moment before darkening. "Where is fellow cultivator Gu?" Qin Yu frowned. Gu Xingping, who had been right in front of him, had disappeared without a trace. Daoist Wu Yuan and Fairy Xiang also had ugly complexions. By the time they arrived, War Bear was nowhere to be found. However, there were traces of broken vines on the ground, so he should have left of his own accord. Now, Gu Xingping had also disappeared. The ancient nascent soul cultivator's cave dwelling had just been opened, and the situation had become strange. Daoist Wu Yuan said, "You too, it looks like you and I should join forces." Fairy Xiang said, "That should be the case." Qin Yu nodded. He walked towards the two, but soon, his complexion darkened. He had already taken several steps and was at least several meters away. But the distance between him and Daoist Wu Yuan and Fairy Xiang didn't shrink at all. Rather, it grew even further. Stopping, Qin Yu flicked his sleeves. Magic power wildly surged out, rolling up the fallen leaves on the ground. With a flick of his sleeves, countless withered leaves flew into the air. But when they fell to the ground, they were exactly the same as before. Even the distance between each leaf didn't change at all. Array formation. Qin Yu's complexion was dignified. Daoist Wu Yuan and Fairy Xiang's eyes widened. From their expressions, it wasn't hard to guess that there were countless wild horses galloping about in their hearts. Qin Yu, whose hands were covered in blood and his slaughter energy was astonishing, and his strength was unfathomably deep, was actually an array formation idiot. He couldn't even leave a mere trapping array formation. How had he cultivated to this day? The path of array formations was widely used. In addition, there were cultivators like Gu Xingping who specialized in the power of array formations. Thus, most cultivators would learn a thing or two during their long lives in order to avoid being plotted against by others in the future. It was normal for the energy refining realm to not understand array formations, and the foundation establishment realm wasn't much either. But for a Golden Core realm master, especially one at the late Golden Core realm, to have 9 out of 10 points in the path of array formations, that was far too rare. And with this, he still dares to follow us into the cave dwelling of an ancient nascent soul cultivator. Didn't he know that these ancient cultivators loved to weave a net of array formations around their residences? As the two looked at Qin Yu, there was a bit more pity in their eyes. Was it because the ignorant had no fear, or did he really not know how to write the word death? Daoist Wu Yuan coughed. "Fellow Daoist Qin, I think you should stay here and not move around." Fairy Xiang nodded. Although there aren't any powerful array formations here for now, no one can be sure if there are any other fierce methods hidden here. It is indeed dangerous to recklessly rush in. Qin Yu's complexion was ugly. Daoist Wu Yuan and Fairy Xiang turned and left. Their movements weren't any different, they simply turned around and walked away normally. But they were relaxed and carefree, as if the array formations in this garden didn't exist at all. After several steps, the two of them seemed to enter the fog. Their figures blurred and they vanished from sight. The gloomy expression on Qin Yu's face faded. He looked behind him, a solemn expression on his face. The moment he stepped into this place, he discovered that Gu Xingping had disappeared. But there was something else that had occurred at the time that had caused his heart to skip a beat, thus his reaction had been a beat slower. The magic power within his body was rapidly circulating. This wasn't because he was urging it, but because it was natural and joyful. This was the call of magic power. It was as if there was something in this cave dwelling that came from the same source as him, calling out to him. Was this real? Or was it a disguise of an array formation, a trap laid down by an ancient cultivator? After hesitating for a moment, Qin Yu's pupils shrank. He stepped towards the direction of the call, and as if he were stepping into a trickle of water, he could feel the strength of the array formations in the courtyard. But at this time, this strength no longer had any effect on him. Qin Yu's eyes brightened. After several steps, he arrived behind the rockery and vanished from sight. After a moment, several withered leaves on the ground suddenly opened up and a small snake the thickness of a thumb drilled out. Its cold and gloomy eyes swept around before revealing a look of anger. Then, it turned and drilled back into the leaves. Outside the garden, on a small bridge that was covered in vines, Daoist Wu Yuan casually flicked his sleeves and put away the little black snake. His face darkened. Fairy Xiang's eyes flashed. What is it? Daoist Wu Yuan shook his head. It's nothing. As he spoke, he took several steps forwards. Then, with a cry of alarm, a vine wrapped around his feet and dragged him away. Fairy Xiang angrily shouted out. Powerful fluctuations of magic power erupted. Dozens of feet away, Daoist Wu Yuan easily stood up. The vines that wrapped around his body had already withered and turned pitch black. Glancing at the magic power fluctuations, Daoist Wu Yuan turned and walked away, his speed more than double that of before. This ancient cultivator cave dwelling was first discovered by War Bear. He knew some secrets and had other plans, so this was within his expectations. But with Gu Xingping and Qin Yu disappearing one after another, his confident plan had suddenly become passive. He had to hurry up, otherwise he feared he wouldn't even be able to fish out a single drop of soup from this ancient cultivator cave dwelling. After turning around the rockery, there was a small gravel path. Even though it was covered with withered leaves, he could still feel the hardness and sharpness of the ground beneath his feet. Qin Yu didn't doubt that if he didn't follow the summoning of magic power, the moment he stepped onto this small path, the terrifying strength contained within it would have exploded. At the very least, blood would have gushed out. The path of forbidden array formations, the path of forbidden array formations, the path of forbidden array formations, important things had to be repeated 3 times. Qin Yu promised himself that once this matter was over, he would seriously study it. This was too passive. But at this time, he was even more curious as to just what was summoning him with magic power. Qin Yu hadn't changed his cultivation method, he still used the Eastern Mountain sect's incomplete true wood arts. Thus, it was hard to imagine how an ancient nascent soul cave dwelling could be related to the Eastern Mountain sect. Moreover, this summoning seemed to be extremely good. It didn't harm Qin Yu at all and helped him pass through the ancient nascent soul cave dwelling unimpeded. But, no one knew what was hidden in front of him. Perhaps it was a great harvest, or perhaps it was a great maw that would bite him in half and swallow him whole. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. The path of forbidden array formations, for the 4th time. The small path was extremely long and seemed to pass through the entire cave dwelling. Along the way, he passed through 3 gardens and a large courtyard. It was clear that there had been many people living here in the past. But, what was strange was that there wasn't a single skeleton here. Where did the people who lived here go? Did they leave before the cave dwelling was sealed? Qin Yu felt that something was wrong. If there really were people who left in the past, it would have been impossible for this cave dwelling to be preserved until today. It would have already been turned upside down by the red-eyed golden core cultivators. But if no one left and he couldn't see any skeletons, just thinking about it was terrifying. Suddenly, Qin Yu stopped. He stood on the gravel path and looked to the side with sharp eyes. A trace of white was particularly eye-catching amongst the withered leaves. With a flick of his sleeves, withered leaves and branches flew away to reveal a headless skeleton. He had been wondering why there weren't any skeletons, but now that he saw it, he didn't relax at all. Rather, his complexion became even more dignified. The quality of this skeleton was far too new. Using the word quality to describe a skeleton might be a bit disrespectful, but this was the truth. And most importantly, the missing part of its head had just been cut off. Qin Yu's senses had always far surpassed those of ordinary people. Thus, even though this skeleton was several dozen feet away and was nearly completely buried in withered leaves, he was still able to see it. He could also clearly see where it was cut off. There was absolutely no mistake about it. Daoist Wu Yuan and Fairy Xiang had gone in the opposite direction. If so, then the one who cut off the skeleton's head must have been either War Bear or Gu Xingping. But the problem was, why would one of them run over here and take a head? Moreover, this skeleton clearly didn't match with the time that the cave dwelling was sealed. This meant that someone had come here at some point in the day. Things seemed even stranger. Qin Yu hesitated for a moment and then continued forwards. The reason was simple. No matter what happened, since he had already entered, he had no other choice. Waiting silently wasn't Qin Yu's style. Since there were layers upon layers of doubts in the cave dwelling, he would slowly unravel them. The truth would eventually emerge. Shaw, shaw, in the tranquil silence, only the sound of footsteps stepping on fallen leaves echoed in his ears. Everything was bleak and bleak, leaving one's mind tense. Shua, Qin Yu came to a stop. The gravel path seemed to come to an end. Between the thick leaves, a floating mountain loomed in his line of sight. His eyes flashed. After taking several steps forward, his breathing suddenly stopped. His entire person was like a piece of withered wood, blending in with the surrounding environment. The aura restraining law formula and aura restraining jade pendant were revolving with full force. In front of him, there was a sound. Chapter 95. Genius in a Second to Remember Love. The floating mountain was 1,000 feet high. It was blue in color and completely bare. In the middle of the mountain was a black cave that led straight into the mountain. Below was a mountain valley. There was a round pond and sculptures in the valley. It was one with the surrounding mountains and forests. It was clear that the scenery here in the past must have been excellent. Now, the round pond hadn't dried up yet. It was covered in green and rotten black leaves that emitted a pungent stench. The sculptures were crooked and broken, as if they had experienced a great upheaval. Two figures faced each other from afar. As they stood in the mountain valley, magic power surged around their bodies, causing the leaves and stones on the ground to rustle and rustle. Daoist Wu Yuan's face was full of praise. Fellow Daoist Gu has truly hidden his strength. Your disguise is so exquisite that I didn't notice anything before. He paused for a moment and continued to say, it seems that fellow Daoist Gu deliberately became enemies with Qin Yu because he had a plan in mind. He wanted to use the discord between the two of you to dispel our worries. That's right, with fellow Daoist Gu's exquisite array formation skills, after seeing Qin Yu's cave dwelling, you must have realized that he didn't know anything about array formations at all. That's why you allowed him to escape without any scruples. Hee, admirable, admirable. Gu Xingping coldly snorted. He didn't deny it, but rather tacitly agreed. His eyes were cold and sharp. Fellow Daoist Wu Yuan is also surprising. I didn't expect you to arrive here so quickly. Daoist Wu Yuan shook his head. You flatter me. The reason I was able to arrive here so quickly is all thanks to fellow Daoist Gu. Gu Xingping's complexion changed. He roared out loud and magic power surged around him. A small white insect was shaken out and crushed to pieces in midair. A location-locating Gu insect. Daoist Wu Yuan nodded. Fellow Daoist Gu is quite knowledgeable. It's just that this thing isn't easy to raise, so why must fellow Daoist be so angry and kill it? The corners of his lips curled up. But, I forgot to tell fellow Daoist Gu that my location-locating Gu is different from others. Gu Xingping stuffily coughed. His face paled with anger and shock. Daoist Wu Yuan smiled. A Gu insect is poisonous, but as long as it is alive, the poison won't flare up. Fellow Taoist Gu's movements were far too fast. Even if I wanted to warn you, I wouldn't have enough time. But don't worry, fellow Taoist, this poison isn't fatal. It will only hinder the circulation of fellow Taoist's magic power. Its effect is quite similar to the talisman you used to kill that cultivator Qiu. Gu Xingping roared, despicable. Taoist Wu Yuan coldly sneered. Fellow Taoist Gu has just entered the cave and yet you want to leave by yourself. Isn't that despicable? The pot calling the kettle black. What's the point? He took a step forward. Fellow Taoist Gu, although this place isn't beautiful, it's still the burial place of an ancient nascent soul cultivator. To be able to share a grave with him is also a wonderful thing. Let me send you on your way. You won't be lonely when you meet your ancestors in the underworld. Bang! Black magic power erupted. It was as viscous as ink and emitted a chill. There was also a faintly discernible stench that spread out. Gu Xingping took a few deep breaths, and his chest heaved even more violently. He hastily held his breath, roared, and waved his sleeve. Shwa, large amounts of talismans flew out, every single one erupting with resplendent spiritual light. They were like stars, illuminating this place. Taoist Wu Yuan didn't dare to be careless. He cautiously drew back several steps, avoiding the range of the exploding talisman. With a thought, he controlled the black magic power to spread out like a tide, corroding and destroying the talisman. Gu Xingping sat down cross-legged. He swallowed several pills, his forehead dripping with a cold sweat. He wanted to force out the poison from his body, but as the medicinal efficacy spread out, the toxicity suddenly rose. With a stuffy cough, Gu Xingping spat out a mouthful of black blood. Ha! Give up. Wu Yuan's products are all top quality. Once you've been poisoned by me, even a nascent soul cultivator will have to expend some effort. Taoist Wu Yuan laughed. Break for me. Paw, paw, a massive number of talismans exploded. With a miserable cry, Gu Xingping was covered in black magic power. Taoist Wu Yuan's lips curved up. Let's end this. With a miserable cry, Taoist Wu Yuan's lips curved up. Let's end this. His figure closed in. He lifted a hand and pressed down. As he pressed down, the black magic power began to burn. After the boundless poisonous fire touched flesh and blood, it would never stop until the soul was burned into nothingness. Bang! The black magic power was like a bubble. It was violently torn apart and a dazzling divine light erupted. With lightning speed, it rumbled towards Taoist Wu Yuan. With a roar of anger, Taoist Wu Yuan was sent flying backwards. His arms and chest emitted loud cracking sounds as countless bones broke. He crashed into the ground, smashing it open. A deep trench was dug into the ground, causing mud and stone to splash out. Puff! He spat out several mouthfuls of blood. Gu Xingping violently coughed. His face was covered in dust and his robes were in tatters. Wherever his body had been touched by the black fire, pus would ooze out. He held a talisman in his hand. The talisman was made of jade, flowing with light. Wu Yuan, you want to kill me? You don't have the qualifications. Taoist Wu Yuan clenched his teeth. Gu Xingping, do you think you can preserve your life like this? He lifted his hand and a small black snake crawled out from his sleeve. He bit down on the snake's head and swallowed down the snake's blood and venom. Taoist Wu Yuan's aura rapidly stabilized. Gu Xingping's complexion changed. He took out a scarlet pill and swallowed it. He pitifully smiled. I never thought that I would have no choice but to swallow this 5-poison pill today. His complexion darkened. Because of this, 50 years of my life have vanished into nothing. You ignorant fool Wu Yuan, I swear that I will never rest until you die. The two of them sat down cross-legged, no longer speaking. They focused on recovering from their injuries. Although their faces were cold and expressionless, they still felt regret in their hearts. It had to be known that 5 people had entered the ancient nascent soul's cave dwelling today. If they were discovered by others in their current state, the consequences would be dire. Because of this, the two of them didn't hesitate to use ruthless methods to heal themselves. As for each other, although they wished they could tear each other to shreds, they wouldn't easily kill each other before they had the strength to protect themselves. The area beneath the floating mountain fell silent. Qin Yu's thoughts stirred. The magic power within his body suddenly revolved. Just as he was about to attack, a trace of red flashed in the distance. It was dazzling. Qin Yu's aura instantly fell silent. With 2 angry roars, Gu Xingping and Daoist Wu Yuan attacked at the same time, sending the red thread flying away. But because of this collision, all of their efforts to heal themselves were wasted. At the same time, they wept tears of blood. Whoosh, the red thread flew back like a bolt of lightning. Fairy Xiang stepped forwards. This was a woman who had the appearance of a 25 or 26-year-old but the eyes of a 35 or 36-year-old. She was graceful, like the daughter of a noble family. Even though she had launched a sudden attack to kill them, she still had a light expression on her face. Xiang Ryu. Daoist Wu Yuan roared out, "You dare to try to kill me." Gu Xingping only had the strength to gasp for breath. First he had been poisoned, then he had been wounded by Wu Yuan, and now he had blocked Fairy Xiang's attack. His injuries were the heaviest. The 5 poison pills' fiery and overbearing medicinal efficacy rapidly spread through his body, but it was only able to prevent his injuries from worsening. Fairy Xiang remained calm. If we were in each other's shoes, would 2 fellow Taoists be willing to let me go? As her eyes fell upon the floating mountain, they suddenly brightened. Fellow Daoist Wu Yuan, fellow Daoist Gu, I do not wish to take your lives. As long as you 2 restrain yourselves, I swear that I will not harm you. Gu Xingping hurriedly said, I agree. Although Daoist Wu Yuan was unwilling, the situation was against his will. He could only grit his teeth and nod. Fairy Xiang straightened her clothes. I thank 2 fellow Taoists for helping me. She stepped forwards and her figure gracefully flew forwards, falling into the entrance of the floating mountain. In the next moment, there was a pitiful scream. Fairy Xiang, who had just entered, was sent flying backwards at an even faster speed. Her robes had been destroyed, exposing her delicate body. Just looking at it would cause one to have nightmares. Most of her skin had already rotted away and hung loosely on her body. Her scarlet flesh was exposed to the air. Because of the pain, her body shivered and one could see her flesh twitching and twisting. In a single breath of time, it was as if she had walked through a wok of boiling oil. Whoosh, there was the sound of breaking air. A dazzling blood-red beam of light crashed into the mountain forest, sweeping up large swathes of leaves and branches. Before the 3 people could regain their composure, they had already rushed into the floating mountain. It was Qin Yu. When Fairy Xiang flew into the floating mountain, magic power had called out to him, warning him. Thus, he hadn't come out. But the moment she was injured and forced out, that warning sign suddenly disappeared, and the summoning of magic power suddenly became urgent. His thoughts instantly collided. Qin Yu chose to attack. The blood escape art erupted and in a tenth of a breath of time, he had entered the floating mountain. Rumble rumble, magic power revolved within his body. If there was even the slightest disturbance, he would attack with all his strength. Luckily, the terrifying attack from the floating mountain hadn't arrived yet. With several flashes of light, he appeared in a giant stone cave. What greeted his eyes was a very, very large pool on the ground. The walls were smooth and red, as if they had been soaked in fresh blood. There was nothing else in the pool, only skeletons. There were men, women, young, and old. It was hard to calculate how many there were, but they nearly filled the entire pool. With just a glance, one could feel a bloody slaughter energy rushing towards them. It was as if they could hear the mournful cries of countless departed souls. Qin Yu was instantly enlightened. No wonder all the people living in such a large cave dwelling had disappeared. Perhaps they had all been gathered here. Looking up, there was a stone platform above the pool. Perhaps it could be called an altar. Countless black root-like objects drilled out from beneath it, drilling into the pool. Now, they were like dead trees, supporting the jade platform so that it didn't fall. A skeleton sat cross-legged on the jade platform. Even though it had experienced the erosion of time, it still seemed like jade, emitting a warm luster. Faintly, one could feel a terrifying aura from this skeleton. Without a doubt, this was the remains of the master of this place, the ancient nascent soul cultivator of the past. Outside the floating mountain, Fairy Xiang could no longer maintain her indifferent expression. Her beautiful face began to distort. When contrasted with her terrifying body, she seemed like a demon that had crawled out from hell. Gu Xingping and Daoist Wu Yuan were left dumbfounded. Although the blood-red beam of light flashed by, with their cultivations they were still able to see the figure within. Qin Yu, it was actually him. You bastard! With a loud shout, another side of the mountain forest exploded. War Bear strode forwards like a tiger descending a mountain, his aura terrifying to the extreme. He punched out his fist, sending Fairy Xiang flying away. Then, he stepped forwards and shot straight towards the floating mountain. Everything had been going according to plan, but Qin Yu's appearance had ruined all of his plans. He could only stare helplessly on as he flew into the floating mountain. The treasures are mine. All the treasures are mine. With a roar in his heart, War Bear raised his speed to the limit and vanished from sight. Fairy Xiang spat out a mouthful of blood. She flicked her sleeves and condensed magic power to protect her terrifying body. She clenched her teeth and screamed, Wu Yuan, Gu Xingping, you and I must join forces. We cannot allow those two to obtain all the benefits. Daoist Wu Yuan and Gu Xingping glanced at each other. They clenched their teeth and forced themselves up. The three of them were severely wounded, but if they joined forces, they might be able to fight. Whoosh, 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 the three of them shot into the skies. Chapter 96. With the sound of breaking air, Qin Yu turned around. War Bear's figure entered his line of sight. With a loud shout, he punched out. Qin Yu stepped forwards. Without dodging, he met it with his fist. Bang! A loud explosion reverberated through the cave, like rolling thunder. War Bear coughed and fluttered backwards. Qin Yu also took several steps back, blood tumbling in his chest. Both of them revealed looks of surprise. War Bear's complexion darkened. Fellow Daoist Qin's cultivation. Qin Yu said without expression, likewise. This War Bear was absolutely a 9th-level Golden Core Master and his mortal body was extremely tyrannical. He had been hiding his true strength all this time. However, the strength that Qin Yu erupted with was also a great surprise for War Bear. The two fell silent. Neither of them had full confidence they could win. At the same time, neither of them could be sure what cards the other had in their hands. Once they fought, perhaps only one of them would be able to survive. At this time, Xiang Ryu, Gu Xingping, and Daoist Wu Yuan arrived. The three of them stood together. Even if they were severely wounded, their strength couldn't be underestimated. At the very least, there was a chance they could drag War Bear and Qin Yu down with them. Fairy Xiang screamed, "Don't think of taking everything for yourself. Either you share it together, or you die." Warbear's face twisted. He roared out, "As for me, I have underestimated the heroes of the world. I didn't want to do this, but you forced my hand." His hand flashed and a skull appeared in it. It was the headless corpse that Chinyu had seen. Light flashed and magic power poured into the skull. A strange black rune appeared between its eyebrows, shining with a demonic light. Ga, the skull flew up on its own, emitting a strange cackle. Hiss, hiss, a small sound spread out. It was weak, but as it fell into the ears, it caused one's hairs to stand on end. Chinyu's pupils shrank. This sound came from the round pond. Then, a terrifying scene appeared. Countless black worms crawled through the skeleton, crazily rushing towards the ground. A cruel, bloody, killing aura blotted out the skies. Warbear revealed a look of fear. He bit down on his fingertip and pointed at the skull. "Kill them." Hum, hum, the black worms flapped their wings, and only then could one see that they actually had a pair of extremely thin and transparent wings. When they closed and stuck to their bodies, it was extremely difficult to detect. Chinyu bore the brunt of the attack. If he wanted to kill them, he would have to start with the strongest. As long as Chinyu died, there would only be Fairy Xiang and the others left. Warbear could personally deal with them. There was no need for the worms to obtain more blood and food, lest they lose control of themselves. Chinyu's expression changed slightly, but before he could do anything, there was a sudden stir in the Imperial Spirit Bag. He could clearly feel the Ant King's excited emotions. With a flick of his sleeve, the Imperial Spirit Bag was opened. The purple-back blue-wing ants howled out. They excitedly cried out and rushed towards the black worm under the lead of the Ant King. Paw, paw, this was the sound of a wriggling black body breaking apart. The purple-back blue-wing ants opened their mouths wide in a frenzy to hunt and devour. In contrast, the black worm's aura completely disappeared. It shivered in incomparable fear and turned around to flee. The purple-back blue-wing ants pursued them all the way. After several breaths of time, each ant had swallowed at least several dozen black worms. Only when they vanished into the depths of the round pond did they unwillingly let out low cries as if they didn't dare to descend. Warbear was dumbfounded. Never had he imagined that the trump card that he didn't dare to use would actually be completely destroyed in just a few breaths of time. He had seen with his own eyes just how terrifying the black worm was. Just what sort of ant was this? How could it be so fierce? Chinyu's thoughts stirred. The swarm of purple-back blue-wing ants howled back, circling above his head. Their compound eyes emitted a fierce and bloodthirsty light that covered the four of them. Their complexions changed. With how terrifying the purple-back blue-wing ants were, if they swarmed over, they feared, they wouldn't be able to stop them. Warbear rapidly drew back. He stood together with Xiang Ruyu, Gu Xingping, and Daoist Wuyuan. Without any communication, the four of them had reached a consensus. The situation had changed. Chinyu revealed a look of hesitation. Warbear said in a low voice, "Fellow Daoist Qin, even if you have the help of spirit insects, the four of us are still at the late Golden Core realm. If we fight to the death, you might not be able to take the advantage." Chinyu frowned. As Xiang Ryut saw this, she hurriedly said, "The nascent soul treasures are right in front of us. If we were to perish together, wouldn't that be too unjust? Fellow Daoist Qin, you had best think this through carefully lest we all perish together." Daoist Wuyuan and Gu Xingping clenched their teeth. They galvanized the magic power within their bodies and their auras rose. Chinyu sighed. "It's fine. I didn't have any thoughts of taking all the treasures for myself to begin with. You've all been overthinking things." He tried his best to maintain a calm demeanor and reveal a bit of unwillingness, making it even more believable. At the very least, Warbear and the other three sneered inwardly and relaxed inwardly. They hurriedly nodded and praised fellow Daoist Qin for his noble character and integrity. With a flick of his sleeves, the purple-back blue-wing ants flew back into the Imperial Spirit Bag. Qin still had a bit of unwillingness on his face and a drop of cold sweat quietly melted into his robes. That's right, the purple-back blue-wing ants were indeed powerful. But after swallowing a massive number of black worms, they suddenly became a bit uncontrollable. Luckily, Qin had absolute control over the Ant King, so he was able to barely maintain it. Now that they returned to the Imperial Spirit Bag, the purple-back blue-wing ants collectively fell into a deep slumber. Qin didn't know what had happened, but he was certain that the purple-back blue-wing ants had no way to help him. Thus, he took advantage of the situation and agreed to reconcile with the four of them. Of course, he still had to put on an act. If he agreed so easily, it would definitely arouse their suspicions. Qin let out a breath of relief and Warbear and the other three also breathed a sigh of relief. After seeing the purple-back blue-wing ants, no one wanted to truly face them. The scene fell silent for a time. Qin eyes flashed. He said, "Fellow Daoist Warbear, you should explain everything now." Resentment flashed in Xiang Ryu's eyes. If she had to say who she hated the most here, it was definitely Warbear. This person clearly knew many things that they didn't. If it weren't for him deliberately plotting against her, how could she have fallen into such a miserable state? Gu Xingping and Daoist Wu Yuan also had gloomy expressions. Warbear cursed inwardly. Even at this moment, Qin still hadn't forgotten to sow discord. He awkwardly coughed and said, "Since things have come to this, I won't hide it any longer. That's right, I once entered this ancient cultivator's cave dwelling with several of my companions dozens of years ago. At that time, something horrifying occurred and I don't want to speak of it. But I admit that I hid something from you fellow Taoists." He paused for a moment and continued to say, "But none of you were honest with me. Qin, you didn't have any intention of delving into this matter to begin with." He took advantage of the situation and said, "Since fellow Daoist Warbear has come here before, you should be the clearest about this place. Then I will have fellow Daoist take the treasures left behind by this nascent soul senior. Of course, I believe that with the current situation, fellow Daoist Warbear won't play any more tricks." Warbear hesitated. But as he saw Xiang Ryu and the others also look at him with shining eyes, he could only bitterly smile and agree. He clearly feared the round pond. After several breaths of time, he clenched his teeth and flew up onto the blue stone platform. Beneath the gazes of several people, he picked up the items in his hands and quickly returned. He immediately placed the items on the ground and stretched out his hands to show them to the others. Everyone's eyes widened. There weren't many things left behind by the nascent soul ancient cultivator. There were only 4 items, a storage ring, a mottled copper mirror, a wolf-shaped jade slip, and a gray piece of iron. Without a doubt, the storage ring was the most eye-catching. Unfortunately, after Qin, Warbear, and Fairy Xiang separately investigated it, they found that it was completely empty. Even so, the storage ring itself was over 1,000 feet in size and had been divided into separate spaces. It was absolutely a priceless treasure. The copper mirror's functions were unknown, but it was undoubtedly a magic tool, and it was at least at the nascent soul level. As one swept through it with their divine sense, they felt as if it would freeze. Its might was inevitably terrifying. There were spells on the surface of the jade slip and they needed to carefully unravel it in order to look through it. Perhaps it was a peerless cultivation method or arcane codex, or perhaps it was just trash. Its value was unknown. As for the last piece of iron, it was strangely light, as if he could blow it away with a single breath. But it was terrifyingly hard. Even when Qin used his full cultivation and superimposed the demon body, he wasn't able to leave a single mark on it. His eyes flashed and he quietly put it down. With the treasures in front of them, what followed was to sit down in rows and divide the fruits. Of course, dividing them equally was impossible. Qin Yu didn't decline. Of the 4 treasures, I will choose 2 of them. The rest can be divided among you. War Bear and the others had ugly complexions. After a moment of hesitation, they agreed. If they joined forces, they would only be able to barely contend with Qin Yu. This sort of distribution was also reasonable. Qin Yu smiled. The storage ring and bronze mirror, I want them. War Bear roared, impossible. He took a deep breath. Fellow Daoist Qin, you and I both know that of the 4 treasures, these 2 are the most valuable. The jade slip and iron block might be treasures, but they might also be trash. If fellow Daoist Qin wants to eat meat, you should at least give us some soup to drink. Fellow Daoist Wu Yuan clenched his teeth. That's right. Fellow Daoist Qin can take 2 treasures first, so we have no objections. But, you cannot choose the storage ring and copper mirror together. Qin Yu thought about it again and again. Whatever, I will choose the storage ring and jade slip. He looked up, his eyes gloomy. This is my bottom line. Don't force me to become hostile. Gu Xingping's lips moved, but in the end he didn't make a sound. He was skilled in the path of array formations and could feel that the restrictions on the jade slip were extraordinary. But, the current situation was beyond his control. Qin Yu lifted his hand and put away the storage ring and jade slip. Although his complexion was a bit gloomy, joy gushed out from his heart. Of the 4 treasures, the one he wanted the most was in truth this jade slip. This was because after entering the cave dwelling, he felt a magic power calling out to him, and it actually came from this jade slip. Qin Yu didn't know what this represented, but from the very start he had decided to take this jade slip into his hands. He chose the copper mirror first because he wanted to take a step back and then lock onto his true target. This was a much safer method. It had to be known that what War Bear and the others feared were the purple-back blue-wing ants. But now, these little ancestors were sleeping soundly in the Imperial Spirit Bag. Since Qin Yu was using his connections to intimidate others, he naturally had to be cautious in his actions. Luckily, everything went smoothly. After obtaining what he wanted, all that was left was the copper mirror and iron lump. Although Qin Yu coveted them, he knew he couldn't obtain them, so he didn't care much about them. After a fierce battle, War Bear was left gasping for breath. His face was flushed red and blue veins stuck out on his neck. But when Fairy Xiang tore apart her dress formed from magic power and revealed her terrifying body, he finally lowered his head unwillingly. He clenched his teeth and placed the iron lump into his storage bag. But, Qin Yu didn't know whether or not it was an illusion, but he seemed to see a hint of joy in the depths of War Bear's eyes. This person had entered the cave dwelling twice, so it was clear he knew a great deal. Could this iron lump be some extraordinary treasure? Qin Yu suppressed these thoughts. Now wasn't the time to be thinking too much. Fairy Xiang, Daoist Wu Yuan, and Gu Xingping all obtained the copper mirror. It was unknown how they divided it up, but in the end Fairy Xiang received the copper mirror. The 2 people outside had calm expressions. It was clear they had received enough compensation. After a careful search and making sure they hadn't missed anything, the investigation of the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling came to an end. The 5 people withdrew from the floating mountain. In the thick shadows below, they found an ancient array formation. The array formation had clear signs of being repaired. There was also a bit of powder left over from spirit stones that had exhausted their spiritual strength. Chapter 97. Entering the cave was extremely difficult, but leaving was very simple. War Bear's complexion darkened. In the past, I left through this array formation. If you don't believe me, you can carefully examine it. If you want to leave, just put some spirit stones inside, and the formation will activate automatically. He looked at Qin Yu and bitterly smiled. My decades of painstaking planning cannot compare to what fellow Daoist Qin has obtained in a few days. I will continue to stay here and see if there are any other harvests. Farewell. With that said, he turned and left, disappearing in a few breaths of time. Gu Xingping stepped forward and carefully inspected the array formation. After a long time, he nodded, indicating that there were no problems. He, Fairy Xiang, and Daoist Wu Yuan had all suffered heavy injuries. The most urgent matter at hand was to recover from their injuries, so they naturally wouldn't stay behind. Spiritual light soared into the sky, and violent winds howled. The figures of the three people in the formation distorted and dissipated. Qin Yu suddenly sneered. Fellow Daoist bear, you're hiding in the dark. Are you trying to plot against me? The surroundings were silent. Qin Yu's eyes were cold. After several breaths of time, he muttered, he's not here. It seems I was overthinking things. He turned around and stepped into the formation. With a flick of his sleeves, he swept away the powder and filled in the spirit stones. The air began to surge. Qin Yu grasped the spirit stone in his hand. He was just one more piece away from completion. At this moment, he growled, "Found you." With a wave of his hand, he took out the imperial spirit pouch and formed a hand seal. Go! Crash! In the mountain forest not far away, War Bear's figure erupted, fleeing in panic. Qin Yu drew back his hand and filled in the last spirit stone. With a brilliant flash of light, he vanished from sight. Shua, War Bear stopped, his face twisting. He didn't know that in the end, he had been played by Qin Yu. But very quickly, his expression calmed down, and his lips curled into a sinister smile. Qin Yu, do you think you can get rid of me like this? Dream on. Somewhere 600 kilometers away from Severed Spirit Mountain, space suddenly distorted. Then, a violent gust of wind blew, sand and pebbles flew everywhere. Many small branches snapped and were torn apart in midair. Qin Yu's figure appeared. With a flick of his sleeves, he erased the remnant array formation fluctuations. He looked up, determined the direction he was heading in, and then stimulated his magic power to howl away. A moment later, Qin Yu returned to the mountain valley. As he sensed that the array formation was intact, he relaxed. With a flick of his sleeves, he opened the array formation and stepped into the fog. Without disturbing Yun Shueqing, he entered the ant room and released the slumbering purple-back blue-wing ants from the imperial spirit bag. Faint traces of spiritual strength rippled in the air. One could clearly feel that this spiritual strength was being absorbed by the purple-back blue-wing ants. After carefully sensing the ant swarm and determining that there were no problems, Qin Yu relaxed a little. But, he couldn't help but frown. The first time the purple-back blue-wing ant appeared, it had already established a great merit. Qin Yu was naturally worried that it would suddenly fall asleep. Perhaps it was because of those black worms. He flipped through the ancient beast dominion art and found the ancient insect ranking list. There were detailed records of the purple-back blue-wing ants. He carefully looked through them for a long time but didn't obtain much. Helpless, he could only put this matter aside for the time being and wait for the Ant King to awaken before using it to find out what had happened. Just as Qin Yu was about to leave, a strange expression crossed his face. He turned and flew out of the cabin. Between heaven and earth, the stable spiritual power was restless, gradually like the boiling water in a pot. The bright sky above their heads quickly darkened as dark clouds gathered. Because of his previous experience, Qin Yu easily judged that this was heavenly tribulation for breaking through. To be more accurate, this was the heavenly tribulation of a Foundation establishment cultivator breaking into the Golden Core realm. Looking at the position of the tribulation clouds, it was clear that the person crossing tribulation was in the valley. That could only be Yun Xueqing. Shua, a beautiful figure, flew out. As Yun Xueqing saw Qin Yu, she was excited and her face lit up with joy. But in the blink of an eye, she looked embarrassed and apologetic. Qin Yu said, "Miss Yun, there is no need to think too much. Just cross your tribulation in peace." Yun Xueqing took a deep breath and nodded. Kacha, tribulation thunder fell. Yun Xueqing was clearly a bit flustered. She raised her hand and summoned an umbrella-shaped magic tool. But her magic power wasn't released in time. Before the magic tool's power reached its peak, it collided with the tribulation thunder. Lightning overflowed in all directions. The umbrella-shaped magic tool wailed as it was directly smashed apart by the lightning. Yun Xueqing cried out in alarm. Qin Yu flicked his sleeves and 36 Sky Thunder bamboo magic swords howled out from the clouds, purple lightning filling the air. Thunder and lightning attracted each other, and even heavenly tribulation was no exception. Most of the tribulation thunder that struck Yun Xueqing was sucked away by the purple lightning. The 36 Sky Thunder bamboo magic swords were bathed in the tribulation thunder, humming and humming. With the pressure greatly reduced, Yun Xueqing finally stabilized her mind and blocked the rest of the tribulation thunder. The black clouds scattered and bright sunlight sprinkled down. The aura of heavenly tribulation vanished from sight. Qin Yu frowned. Inexplicably, he felt a terrifying pressure, as if the world were about to collapse. Luckily, this pressure only lasted for an instant before disappearing. This was a warning from the world. He had once heard that if one interfered in someone else's tribulation, they would receive a warning from the world. In fact, when one crossed tribulation in the future, the difficulty would be increased to a certain degree, and this would be the punishment of the world. But just now, Qin Yu had felt a trace of killing intent from that pressure. That's right, although it was weak, Qin Yu was sure that there was no mistake in that suppressed killing intent. In fact, it even gave him a feeling of impatience. It was just that there was some sort of restriction that made it choose to let go. The "it" here referred to the surrounding world. Instinctively, Qin Yu thought back to the heavenly thunder that the little blue lamp had swallowed up. Vague thoughts swelled in his mind. It seemed that from the moment he obtained the little blue lamp, he had stepped onto a path different from other cultivators. And at the end of this path, he would be rejected and loathed by the world. Finally, in the rage of the world, he would be destroyed in body and soul, dying without a grave. Fear rose up from the depths of his soul. Like a prairie fire in autumn, it instantly spread to his entire mind. Sweat drilled out from his pores, soaking his black robes. A voice roared in Qin Yu's mind, "Sacrifice the little blue lamp, sacrifice it. As long as you sacrifice it, you can obtain the approval of the world once more. You will be favored by the world and have an incomparably bright future." His consciousness drifted like a boat in the raging waves, ready to capsize at any moment. At this critical moment, a voice floated in from the distance. "Senior Qin." Senior Qin. Qin Yu's consciousness suddenly found a direction. It followed the direction of this voice, crazily swimming and rushing forwards. After an unknown period of time, just as he was about to give up in exhaustion, his consciousness returned to his body and the world around him became lively once more. "Hoo, Qin Yu gasped for breath. He didn't know what that voice was, but he had an intuition that if he chose to sacrifice the little blue lamp, he would thoroughly lose it. Yun Xueqing had a worried expression. "Senior Qin, are you all right? Are you all right?" Qin Yu waved his hand at her. As he looked at the woman in front of him, gratitude rose from the depths of his heart. If it weren't for her, he really might not have been able to wake up. Although it could be said that Yun Xueqing crossing tribulation was the cause of all of this, Qin Yu was well aware that even if today's events didn't occur, what would come would eventually come. And at that time, there might not be another Yun Shueching who could call back his consciousness. Thus, Qin Yu was still grateful. If Yun Shueching was in trouble in the future, he would definitely help her. Qin Yu took several deep breaths. His face was still pale, but his breathing was much calmer. Miss Yun, congratulations. Sensing that Qin Yu didn't want to say too much, Yun Shueching cleverly didn't ask. I must thank Senior Qin for helping me, otherwise the consequences would have been unimaginable. Qin Yu smiled. Now that you are a golden core, you can speak to me as an equal. Yun Shueching smiled. That's right, I can call you fellow Daoist Qin again. When we were in Immortal Eclipse Valley, you really hid yourself deeply. As she spoke, she stuck out her tongue like a little girl. The reason I was able to break through my bottleneck was all thanks to the rich spiritual strength of the valley and the peaceful environment. In short, I must thank fellow Daoist Qin. The chicken overlord drilled out from somewhere, several strands of straw still hanging from its head. It glanced at the happily chatting young man and woman, its lips curling up in a satisfied smile. This overlord has unique eyesight. When did I make a mistake? You two finally couldn't bear it any longer. The chicken overlord looked again. That hateful wild wolf actually didn't appear. It was stunned for a moment. Then, it flapped its wings several times, becoming even more arrogant. Look, just who is the coward here? This overlord isn't even afraid of heavenly tribulation, but some wolf is so scared that its legs are still weak and it can't even crawl out of its nest. Today is the day that this overlord will prove its name. As its heart surged with excitement, the chicken overlord didn't notice that the young man and woman were already saying their final goodbyes. Yun Shueching revealed an apologetic expression. Fellow Daoist Qin, I must leave. Qin Yu smiled. Now is indeed the best time. War Bear and the others were all injured, so it was impossible for them to appear now. Leaving now was the safest option. Yun Shueching didn't understand his meaning. She only thought that Qin Yu was talking about breaking into the Golden Core realm. She embarrassedly smiled and said, My father must be worried sick right now. Moreover, I want to let him know as soon as possible that I smoothly broke through. Fellow Daoist Qin, Shueching comes from the Northern Empire's Snowfall City. If there is a chance, you must come and let me express my gratitude. Qin Yu nodded. It's a deal. Yun Shueching floated away. The chicken overlord blinked its eyes, a puzzled expression on its face. In its mind, the male and female were intimate with each other. Chapter 98. 3 days later, Qin Yu awoke from his cultivation. A sharp light flashed in his eyes. The damage to his consciousness from the impact had been completely restored. After pondering for a moment, the storage ring on his finger flashed, and a wolf-shaped jade slip appeared. Because the original owner had died, the storage ring had lost its mark. It was actually quite convenient for it to recognize a master. With just a few drops of blood, it had become Qin Yu's. Just the storage ring and the trip to the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling could be considered a great harvest. In addition, there was also an unknown jade slip waiting for him to open. The reason for the strange summoning of magic power was about to be revealed. Wolf-shaped jade slips were rarely seen. To be exact, most cultivators had never seen jade slips with this special shape before. It had a single eye that was covered by black skin. It was staring up at the sky, and its eyeball was sparkling like a real eye. This image seemed familiar. That was right, when the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling was opened, the giant wolf phantom that appeared between the two mountains had the same appearance. No, apart from that, it also felt familiar. Qin Yu thought for several breaths of time and then chuckled. Wild wolves. It was the arrogant chicken overlord that he had left in the valley not too long ago, the chicken overlord that he had left behind in the valley. One of his eyes had been pecked blind by the chicken overlord. It was unknown where the chicken overlord had found a piece of black skin and pasted it over his eye. It was actually somewhat similar to the appearance of this jade slip. He shook his head and gathered his thoughts. He closed his eyes and his divine sense gushed out like water, wrapping around the wolf-shaped jade slip and carefully feeling the seal on its surface. It was complex, but fortunately, it wasn't impossible to solve. After careful consideration for a long time, Qin Yu's divine sense began to move like a pair of nimble hands, unraveling silk from cocoons. This was a slow work that could not be rushed at all. Not to mention the fact that a slight mistake would trigger the backlash of the seal, the jade slip itself might also be damaged. 2 hours. 4 hours. It was only when the sun set in the west that Qin Yu opened his eyes. There was a weary look in his eyes, but there was a faint smile on his lips. Just one last step and the seal on the jade strip would be undone. With a flick of his finger, the tip of his finger landed on the jade scroll. His magic power vibrated slightly, giving off a light, paw sound. Roar, a terrifying wolf howl suddenly sounded out. Qin Yu's consciousness was instantly pulled into a black space. A giant wolf looked down at him, its ferocity soaring to the heavens. With just a single glance, Qin Yu felt as if he had fallen into an icy lake. His consciousness nearly froze over. He could feel the air that the great wolf breathed out as it brushed against his consciousness, making him feel as if he were being cut by a small knife. A single eye, a black mask, a wolf-shaped jade slip. Qin Yu instantly understood that the seal on the surface of the jade slip was only a disguise. Or, it could be said that it was to conceal the aura of the great wolf. Once the seal was opened, one would have to face the giant wolf's aura directly. If one was not recognized, one would have to bear its attacks. Although he didn't know what sort of existence this great wolf was, he didn't doubt that its aura was enough to tear apart his consciousness in the blink of an eye. Once the consciousness was destroyed, the soul would dissipate. At that time, even if there were no injuries, it would only be a living, empty shell. Qin Yu wanted to flee, but with the great wolf locked onto him, it was incomparably difficult for him to even think. He simply couldn't move. Roar, the great wolf roared. It seemed to confirm Qin Yu's identity as an intruder. Its single eye shined with a cold light and it opened its mouth, gathering black light. In the next instant, his consciousness would be shattered like a broken twig. Suddenly, the great wolf's movements came to a stop. It seemed a bit puzzled. It tilted its head as if it were listening intently. Then, it leaned over and sniffed Qin Yu a few times. Hesitation flashed in its single eye. Finally, it leapt up and vanished from sight. The black space immediately collapsed and disintegrated. Countless beams of light blinded Qin Yu's eyes. It was only then that he discovered that his consciousness had returned to his body. He was still sitting cross-legged, still in the same position as before. It was as if everything just now had been an illusion. But what happened next allowed Qin Yu to know that this was the truth. The wolf-shaped jade slip rapidly dissolved, turning into a mass of black light that shot out from the window. Qin Yu followed, just in time to see this mass of light submerge between the wild wolf's eyebrows. Its eyes instantly widened and it gazed deeply at Qin Yu before falling to the ground, snoring away. This glance wasn't that of a wild wolf. This sort of intelligent feeling was like that of a 1,000-year-old monster. Was it trying to seize its body? Qin Yu hurriedly inspected it. The wild wolf's aura was stable and its soul wasn't chaotic at all. Rather, its aura was constantly strengthening. It was as if he was absorbing some kind of powerful energy. No matter how he looked at it, there was nothing wrong with the wild wolf. Rather, it had obtained great benefits. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. One-eyed wild wolf, one-eyed wolf phantom, wolf-shaped jade slip, there must be some unknown connection between all of this. Rumble rumble, above his head, there was a sudden rumbling sound. Hee, those worms were covered in poison, so how could they be tasty? He thought back to that day when Qin Yu had hesitated over and over again before agreeing to split the harvests from the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling with them. He must have realized that there was something wrong with those ants. How hateful, what a cunning brat. He had actually been tricked by him. In addition to that time at the transmission array, War Bear stopped. He turned and roared, Qin Yu, today is the day you die. Without the help of those ants, he didn't fear anyone under the nascent soul realm. War Bear stood high above, his momentum soaring like a rainbow. At this time, the confident War Bear didn't know just what sort of character Qin Yu was. At the Golden Core realm, he had long ago been able to hang up and beat them up. He had even pulled on a nascent soul tiger's whiskers. That's right, the purple-back blue-wing ants were slumbering, but today there was only War Bear here, so how could he be afraid? With a sneer, the ground suddenly exploded. Qin Yu shot into the skies, all sorts of thoughts flashing through his mind. He could not allow this person to escape today, otherwise there would be no end to his troubles in the future. Bang, one up, one down. In the blink of an eye, two figures were locked in combat. Terrifying fluctuations of strength raged through the valley. Luckily, Qin Yu had taken the initiative to attack and control the battle in midair. Otherwise, his medicine garden and even the radiant redwood would have been destroyed. 10 breaths of time was enough for a master to attack dozens of times. They would probe, lock onto, and then explode with killing intent. But War Bear and Qin Yu's battle had only just begun. The two of them had incomparably dignified expressions. Every time they made a move, it was as if they had thousands of caddies in their hands. But they still held back in order to deal with the other's sudden eruption. The reason was simple, neither of them had full confidence they could kill the other. War Bear was incomparably angry. In the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling, in order to avoid any sudden changes, he had summoned the black worms to draw out the purple-back blue-wing ants. Thus, he hadn't truly fought with Qin Yu. Although War Bear knew that Qin Yu was tyrannically strong, he wasn't worried at all. This was because he was a true powerhouse to begin with. Besides his formidable mortal body, his soul force far surpassed that of ordinary people, and he even had some killing cards in his hands. With such strength, it wouldn't be difficult for him to kill cultivators at the same level. But the feeling that Qin Yu gave off was that he was an unshakable mountain. Luckily, he couldn't easily kill Qin Yu, and it would be difficult for Qin Yu to kill him. Now, it all depended on which of the two was more stable. The one who revealed a flaw first would die. His thoughts raced. War Bear calmed down a little. In terms of close combat experience, he didn't fear anyone. From the time he began refining energy, he had crawled his way to where he was today. Even if he didn't kill 1,000, he still killed 800 enemies. How many could Qin Yu kill? Don't look at how strong he was and how calm his eyes were. But he couldn't deceive anyone with that fresh air about him. He was at most 50 years old. This old bear will continue to waste time with you. Once you panic, you won't be too far from death. In such a high-intensity battle, the consumption of magic power was terrifying. At this speed, even a 9th-level Golden Core cultivator would find it hard to continue. War Bear remained calm. His fists were powerful, erupting with power when he needed to, and killing when he needed to. But his complexion began to darken and he wanted to roar out loud. This bastard Qin Yu, where did he get such a stable mentality from? Where did his magic power come from? Even after such a long time, he still hadn't revealed a single flaw. And what left him cursing the most was that Qin Yu's aura didn't weaken at all. It was as if fighting like this for an entire day wasn't a problem at all. After failing to break into the Golden Core realm 18 times in a row, the magic power within Qin Yu's body was so pure that it could compare to an early Golden Core realm martial artist. With this sort of foundation, when he broke into the Golden Core realm, the quality of his magic power would rise once more. Moreover, as his cultivation increased, his magic power would also rise. Now that he was at the 6th level of the Golden Core, the quality of his magic power was actually higher than that of a hollow nascent cultivator. And, it couldn't be forgotten that besides this, Qin Yu also possessed a powerful demon body. The amount of magic power he could hold far surpassed that of an ordinary cultivator. Warbear's mortal body was also extremely powerful, but in terms of quality, they weren't on the same level when compared to the demon body. In summary, with Qin Yu's calm attitude, this situation was created. Even though Warbear was bursting with confidence, he began to gradually panic. Seeing Qin Yu become more and more courageous the more he fought, Old Bear decided to abandon the path of experience and change to the left. He wanted to quickly cut through the Gordian knot and eliminate him. Bang! After another collision, Warbear borrowed the momentum to draw backwards, opening up some distance between him and Qin Yu. Chapter 99. Qin Yu gasped for breath. His heart raced like thunder, causing his blood to race through his body. From top to bottom, every piece of flesh and bone was crying out in joy. From the time he started cultivating until now, he had never fought to his heart's content like this. Warbear's strength was on par with his, so this was the best chance to test it out. Moreover, as the intensity of the battle continued, he could feel his mortal body gradually being activated. After cultivating the demon body, the violent and tyrannical nature of the demonic path had been hidden deep within his body. Now, in this fierce battle, it was finally being released bit by bit. He hadn't fought to his heart's content yet, so how could he stop? Qin Yu stepped forwards. Space seemed to twist and magic power circulated around him, emitting a deafening roar like a tiger descending a mountain. Warbear cursed this bastard inwardly. He was glad he had changed his strategy, otherwise if he continued like this, he might have been exhausted to death by this boy. A pained expression crossed his face. Warbear clenched his teeth. If he couldn't bear to use the child, he would have to use it. Today, he had to kill Qin Yu. A bright light flashed and a black arrow appeared in his hand. As magic power crazily poured into it, a dazzling red light erupted from its surface. Countless tiny runes floated up and down and a heaven-shaking aura erupted. It was like 1,000 mountains were blocking its path, but it could still break apart with a single strike. Qin Yu's heart shrank and nearly stopped beating. After all, he had only stepped into the Golden Core realm for a short period of time. Even though he was strong, in terms of treasures he had accumulated, there was still a great disparity between him and a veteran Golden Core powerhouse like Warbear. For instance, this arrow caused him to instantly feel a strong aura of death. Whoosh, the black light flashed. What followed was the grating sound of breaking air. Qin Yu only had time to wave his hand before the black arrow arrived. The soul-burying flag unfurled and Black Sky Demon's figure appeared. Before he could point the black jade scepter in his hand, his chest was pierced by the arrow. He froze and then exploded. The soul-burying flag fell to the ground, its strength completely disappearing. The black arrow didn't stop. It struck Moyu's chest, but the moment it touched his chest, there was a light cracking sound and a layer of light protected him. Bang! The light shattered. Qin Yu was sent flying away. The black arrow shadow trembled and vanished from sight. Warbear's face was pale and his robes were soaked with sweat. Qin Yu, no matter how strong you are, once you are struck by the soul-burying arrow, all that awaits you is death. The soul-burying arrow was a terrifying consumable magic treasure that was unintentionally created by a certain ancient artifact refinement sect. Each arrow could only be used once, and once it was shot, it would definitely take a life and bury a soul. Not long after, because it was too sinister and went against the natural order of the world, it was forbidden to continue refining it. Warbear had inadvertently obtained this spear in his early years and had always kept it as his greatest trump card, never showing it in front of others. Now that the arrow's shadows had scattered, that meant the attack was complete and Qin Yu's soul had dispersed. Cough. There was a sudden violent cough. Warbear's happy face froze. He didn't die. How could this be? That was the soul-burying arrow, an ancient and ruthless magical artifact. It had absorbed a large amount of his magic power, but it actually couldn't kill a golden core. What a joke. Blood flowed from the corners of Qin Yu's mouth. A massive pit had been smashed into the ground and the surrounding dozens of feet of medicinal fields had been destroyed. There was a burning pain in his chest and it was unknown just how many of his bones had been broken. Even the slightest movement caused a cold sweat to drip down his forehead. But he was still alive. Black Sky Demon had counteracted the most terrifying soul-extinguishing infernal energy of the soul-burying arrow. The jade pendant that Pill Crucible had given him had blocked its terrifying penetrating attack. This was the reason. A trace of fear rose in Qin Yu's heart. In that instant just now, he had truly brushed shoulders with death. But it was only a trace, because he didn't have time to waste. Warbear was still alive. Since he hadn't died, how could he still be alive? Qin Yu forcefully endured the excruciating pain. Blood-red flames ignited around him as he displayed the blood escape art and shot into the skies. Warbear wanted to run away, but the magic power in his body was already empty. It wasn't enough to help him dodge. Gotcha! A fist smashed into his neck. His neck twisted and bent at an exaggerated angle. The overconfident Warbear didn't seem to have any effect on the result after changing his strategy. He still died on the spot. Qin Yu gasped for breath. He had activated the blood escape art in his severely wounded state, causing his vision to darken. He barely managed to land on the ground. He couldn't care less about Warbear's corpse. He bitterly smiled, a look of joy on his face. With the blood escape art in hand, he thought he was in an invincible position in this battle, but who knew that he would nearly be killed in a single strike? Candid, being too confident wasn't a good thing. Even a lion had to use its full strength to capture a rabbit, much less someone as powerful as Warbear. Today's matter was a lesson that he would remember in the future. He couldn't be so arrogant again. Otherwise, he might not be able to survive next time. Luckily, it was finally over. Just as Qin Yu thought this, his complexion darkened. The valley's array formation had been destroyed by the two of them and it could no longer operate. Looking up, he could see Xiang Ryu's skirt fluttering in the wind. Her pink dress wrapped around her body, revealing only her beautiful face. Fellow Daoist Qin, I haven't seen you for several days. How did you end up in such a distressed state? Qin Yu narrowed his eyes. Fellow Daoist Xiang isn't blind, so you should be able to see clearly. Xiang Ryu frowned. Fellow Daoist Qin, why must you hurl such malicious words at me? Qin Yu coldly sneered. I am the fairy of three cries, so why must fellow Daoist Xiang be the fisherman? Xiang Ryu brightly smiled. Fellow Daoist Qin is a smart person, so how could you ask such a stupid question? Qin Yu took a deep breath. Since no matter what I say, the result won't change, I naturally choose to speak my heart. At the very least, it will be a bit more delightful. Xiang Ryu's complexion didn't change. But, there is a possibility that this will arouse my dissatisfaction with fellow Daoist Qin and make your death more painful, right? For instance, I feel that I can't let fellow Daoist die so quickly. At the very least, before you die, you should taste the feeling of having your entire body corroded away. Her smile became even brighter, but her eyes became cruel and filled with a morbid hatred. Do you know? Ever since I was a child, I have always wanted to be strong. I hate it when others are better than me, no matter what aspect. So, during this trip to the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling, you and War Bear were the two people I hated the most. Why did you come out unscathed and obtain harvests? In particular, you, Chinyu. You are the one who deserves to die the most. You were actually able to obtain the greatest benefits, so how could I be content if I didn't destroy you? Xiang Ryu giggled. Luckily, there was that idiot War Bear. During that one night of romance, he thought he didn't reveal anything, but he didn't know that I had a secret technique that allowed me to eavesdrop on the thoughts of others. As luck would have it, I knew a little about the wolf-shaped jade slip. I knew that he wouldn't let it go. That's why I'm here today. Xiongzhan is dead. You're next. Xiang Ryu blinked her eyes. She stretched out her hand that was hidden in her sleeve. Black and red mottled bones could be seen and traces of flesh and blood growing could be seen. However, the damage to her skin was far from being healed, so it was even more terrifying, like a demonic claw. At this moment, there was an open jade bottle lying quietly in his palm. Fellow Daoist Qin, are you accumulating your strength so that you can give me a fatal strike? Or perhaps you want to break out of the encirclement and escape? Xiang Ryu's smile was bright. But I won't give you such a chance. This is a deadly poison from Daoist Wuyuan's body. It is colorless and odorless, and the most terrifying thing about it is that just breathing it in will cause one's magic power to stagnate and finally cause one's body to rot to death. I took the antidote ahead of time and wasn't afraid, but I wondered if fellow Daoist Qin is afraid. Faint traces of black energy appeared on Qin Yu's face. The originally chaotic magic power within his body completely stagnated. His injuries were no longer suppressed. He spat out a few mouthfuls of blood and sat on the ground, but his expression was very calm. It was as if he did not know how he would die next. Xiang Ryu's eyes flashed. Fellow Daoist Qin doesn't seem to be afraid. Qin Yu shook his head. Of course I'm afraid of death, but I won't die. There was the sound of vibrating wings. Qin Yu revealed a mocking smile. I know that you said so much because you wanted to stall for time and also conveniently show off your extraordinary wisdom. But, have you ever thought about why I was listening? Xiang Ryu's complexion changed. She turned and fled. Bang! The wooden house instantly disintegrated. In the darkness, a massive swarm of purple-back blue-wing ants howled out, catching up to her in the blink of an eye. The magic power around Xiang Ryu violently shook and then shattered. She immediately cried out in pain. A living person had been turned into a bloody mess in the blink of an eye. This time, there was no way for her to protect her most beautiful appearance. Countless pieces of flesh and blood were torn off her face, revealing pale white bones. Her eyes widened and she glared at Qin Yu. She screamed with hatred, "You will also die. And your death will be even more miserable than mine." Qin Yu's hand flashed and a foot of sea blue light bloomed in the darkness. He said in a soft voice, "I'm sorry, but I don't have such a good relationship with you, so it's best if you die by yourself." Xiang Ryu watched helplessly as the poison in Qin Yu's body rapidly retreated and gathered towards his finger. Her eyes filled with despair and then madness. Bang! Terrifying fluctuations of aura erupted. Self-detonation. The purple-back blue-wing ants that were crazily tearing at Xiang Ryu's body suddenly opened up a path. The black and white figures instantly arrived. They tore open Xiang Ryu's abdomen like bolts of lightning and forcefully dug out a shining golden core. Ah! With one last miserable cry, Xiang Ryu, who had lost her golden core, was instantly eaten up. Shwa, the black and white color stopped, revealing the Ant King's figure. Its body had grown larger, and its palm-sized body was covered in black and white patterns. They were simple to the extreme, but also profound to the extreme. The ordinary patterns seemed to contain some sort of supreme principle, and they emitted an ancient aura. These were yin-yang twin ants. Qin Yu revealed a happy expression. He had only felt the purple-back blue-wing ants awaken, but he didn't know that after swallowing the black worms and falling into a deep slumber, they had actually advanced. Looking at the other purple-back blue-wing ants, there were indeed more black and white lines on their bodies. However, they weren't as complete as the Ant King's, and they were also much smaller. After advancing this time, the Ant King had thoroughly stabilized its position. There were several other competitors in the ant swarm that could fight with it, but now they were thrown far behind. Feeling Qin Yu's gaze, the Ant King flapped its wings and instantly flew in front of him, offering up Xiang Ryu's golden core in a flattering manner. The palm-sized Ant King held the golden core that was the size of a child's fist. If it weren't for the bloodstains on the golden core, this scene would have seemed a bit naive. Qin Yu reached out a hand and brushed it over the Ant King. As it closed its eyes in comfort, he took the golden core and sighed with emotion. This Xiang Ryu, she was truly a madwoman. Everyone in the world knew that humans had souls and that samsara existed between the heavens and earth. As long as the soul didn't scatter, one could reincarnate and be reborn. There were even supreme cultivators who, after their cultivation reached the divine soul realm, had a certain chance of awakening the memories of their past lives. This was the same as being reborn. Cultivators were naturally well aware of this. Thus, even though many golden core cultivators had died under Qin Yu's hands, very few of them blew themselves up. This was because once one blew up their golden core, their soul would completely vanish with it and they would lose the qualifications to reincarnate into samsara. Chapter 100. Normally, when a cultivator died, their golden core would shatter and scatter into spiritual strength that returned to the world. Xiang Ryu had self-destructed and her soul had instantly perished, severing her connection with her golden core. This was why her golden core was able to survive and fall into Qin Yu's hands. Sensing it, the aura of the golden core was revealed. It was the 7th level of golden core. In the future when he fought with others he could detonate this golden core. It could be considered a great killing move. Of course, such a method of dealing with a high-level cultivator's golden core was forbidden in the cultivation world. Although no one would really go to a sect to punish them, it was best not to do so in public in the future. Qin Yu took out a jade bottle and placed the golden core inside. He sealed it with a talisman to prevent spiritual strength from leaking out and placed it in his storage ring. The poison was gone and the little blue lamp was put away. Qin Yu took a deep breath and struggled to stand up. He clenched his teeth and began to repair the array formation. His current condition was extremely weak. If he were discovered by others, the consequences would be inconceivable. No matter how strong the purple-back blue-wing ants were, they still had to be cautious. An hour later, Qin Yu's field of vision darkened and his chest was soaked in blood. Finally, the array formation barely managed to revolve again. Fog covered the mountain valley once more. Qin Yu finally couldn't stand it any longer. He sat down cross-legged and took out pills to heal himself. The life of someone with pills was always better than that of others. For an ordinary cultivator with such injuries, they would be lucky if they could get out of bed in 10 days to half a month. But for Qin Yu, his condition stabilized in 2 to 4 hours. In addition to the powerful regenerative abilities of the demon body, he opened his eyes as the sky began to brighten. Although he was still weak, his injuries had already stabilized. There was a stabbing pain in his chest and a numbing itch came from his bones. This was his bones growing. Letting out a deep breath, Qin Yu stood up and walked over to the bloodstains on the ground. He picked up Xiang Ryu's storage bag and inspected it. She was a rich woman, and there were nearly 100,000 spirit stones in there. However, it seemed as if there were more things inside than just her. There were two piles placed together. One pile was filled with bottles and the other pile was filled with jade slips and talismans. Qin Yu looked through them and determined that they belonged to Daoist Wu Yuan and Gu Xingping. And indeed, in a pile of tattered clothes soaked in blood, he found two more storage bags. It seemed that after these two people left the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling alive, they weren't able to escape the fate of being killed. But like this, the problem of Qin Yu studying the path of array formations was easily solved. The many jade slips and talismans that Gu Xingping had left behind were enough for him to use for the time being. There was also Daoist Wu Yuan's bottles and jars. When combined with the overbearing poison immunity of the little blue lamp, Qin Yu felt as if his poison finger would return. Unfortunately, the copper mirror that Xiang Ryu had obtained from the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling wasn't in her storage bag. It was unknown where she had placed it. Shaking his head, he suppressed these thoughts and decided not to look at anything else for the time being. He placed the items into his storage ring and then arrived at War Bear's residence. As an old and formidable Golden Core master, his wealth was even more anticipated. In fact, Xiongzhan's results didn't disappoint Qin Yu. When 200,000 spirit stones were piled together, it was like a small mountain. It was unknown just how many cultivators this person had killed in order to accumulate this much wealth. But now, it was all Qin Yu's doing. There were also several magic tools. Although they weren't as heaven-defying as the soul-burying arrow, they were still good treasures. After refining them, they would be enough to solve Qin Yu's current predicament of lacking magic tools in battle. It wouldn't be too late to refine them after he recovered from his wounds. As he continued to look through, he found that there were many things from every sect. But what Qin Yu couldn't figure out was that War Bear's storage bag actually contained many women's undergarments. It was fine if they were his spoils of war, but as Qin Yu thought about what might be hidden beneath his masculine appearance, he felt uncomfortable all over. He hurriedly disposed of these clothes. This simple action caused beads of sweat to form on Qin Yu's forehead. His body was still too weak. He picked up the jade pendant fragments and the soul-burying flag that had lost all of its fluctuations of strength. Qin Yu ordered the purple-back blue-wing ants to stand guard and then turned to enter the training room. As for War Bear's corpse, collecting the corpse of a powerful enemy and burying it might have been an extremely magnanimous act, but his body's condition didn't allow it. Moreover, he had already killed him. Even if he respectfully kowtowed, War Bear wouldn't stop cursing him in the future. So, he might as well leave this to the purple-back blue-wing ants. As for how to resolve it, there wasn't much to say. 10 days later, Qin Yu opened his eyes in his training room. His aura stagnated for a moment before it suddenly spread out, stirring up strong winds in the void. Golden Core, 7th level. As expected, there were many good fortunes amidst dangerous experiences. After experiencing the nascent soul cave dwelling and fiercely battling War Bear, the hidden strength of the demon body had been stimulated and Qin Yu's cultivation had risen yet again. At the 7th level, he could be considered to have truly stepped into the late Golden Core realm. The quality of his magic power had increased, the quantity had increased, and his absolute strength had risen by a small level. If Qin Yu were to fight War Bear now, in terms of pure strength, he would absolutely suppress him. He carefully sensed the changes within his body and determined that nothing was wrong. Then, he faintly smiled and took out an ordinary jade slip. This was the original appearance of the wolf-shaped jade slip that had melted away. Without any obstruction, he easily probed it with his divine sense. As he read through it, disbelief filled his face, followed by ecstasy. No wonder there was an inexplicable magic power calling out to him. It was like this, it was like this. Chinyu opened his eyes and laughed out loud. During his trip to the ancient cultivator's cave dwelling, this jade slip was his greatest harvest. The Great Divided Heaven Sutra was created countless years ago by a cultivator who called himself Taoist Divided Heaven. It was a miraculous path that allowed a cultivator's magic power to rapidly rise, far surpassing others of the same level. The threshold to cultivate the Great Divided Heaven Sutra was extremely high. One needed to have at least a golden core cultivation. The trick to increasing one's magic power was very direct, and that was to divide one source of magic power into 2, 3, 4, or even 5. As for the exact number, that depended on the strength of the cultivator's soul. As for the source of magic power, everyone should be familiar with it. It was mentioned in the fourth condition to cultivate the 5-element sword diagram. It could be said that the appearance of the Great Divided Heaven Sutra had solved the final difficulty in cultivating the 5-element sword diagram. But this wasn't the most mystical aspect. The most mystical aspect was that Chinyu had already crossed the threshold of the Great Divided Heaven Sutra and had even cultivated it for over a dozen years. That's right, the Eastern Mountain Sect's incomplete 3-page True Wood Arts was the foundational introductory section of the Great Divided Heaven Sutra. Just looking at this section alone, it seemed ordinary without any special characteristics, and all the other aspects were common. But when placed within the entire Great Divided Heaven Sutra, one could see just how important it was. The foundational section laid down one's cultivation foundation. Beneath mediocrity, it laid down an incomparably stable foundation. Only like this would one be able to withstand the magic power vibrations that would occur when dividing the source of magic power. It was also because it was stable and had almost no restrictions on one's future cultivation that the Eastern Mountain Sect used it as a foundational cultivation method for all disciples. The Great Divided Heaven Sutra clearly stated that one needed to cultivate the foundational section for at least 3 years. Only after consolidating their foundation could they proceed to the next step. If conditions were met, 5 years would be the best, and 8 years would be the best. Chinyu didn't need to calculate at all, his foundation couldn't be any better. He would immediately be able to enter the most important section of the Great Divided Heaven Sutra and divide the source of magic power. Chinyu took a deep breath and calmed his surging heart. He tried to revolve the Great Divided Heaven Sutra and found that it went smoothly without any hindrance. He could even hear the magic power surging through his body, emitting excited cheers. Heaven and earth's spiritual strength rapidly flowed into Chinyu's body. Compared to when he was cultivating the true wood art, it was over 10 times stronger. The Great Divided Heaven Sutra allowed one to simultaneously cultivate multiple sources of magic power. In terms of absorbing spiritual strength, it was naturally incomparably powerful. This Great Divided Heaven Sutra was inevitably a top cultivation method. Chinyu opened his eyes, his gaze incomparably bright. Perhaps he could truly begin cultivating the 5-element sword diagram now. Several days later, after carefully studying the Great Divided Heaven Sutra several times and determining that he had completely understood it and remembered it, Chinyu discovered that he had been thinking too simply. That's right, the Great Divided Heaven Sutra could indeed open up multiple sources of magic power. But these magic power sources were of the same origin, so their quality was also the same. In simpler terms, Chinyu couldn't gather all 5 elements. So even if he successfully cultivated it, even if his magic power was 5 times that of others of the same level, he still wouldn't be able to display the 5-element sword array. After fulfilling all the harsh conditions to cultivate the 5-element sword diagram and experiencing its formidable might, how could Chinyu be willing to give up now that he was just a single step away? As for how he could rely on the Great Divided Heaven Sutra to cultivate 5 types of 5 elemental sources of magic power, this became the key problem that plagued Chinyu. After pondering this question for half a month, Chinyu had no choice but to stop. He hadn't obtained anything from this attempt. This sort of matter wasn't something a cultivator of his level could solve. But in Immortal Eclipse Valley, even someone as strong as Pill Crucible and Jiangli hadn't found a way to make up for the 5 elemental sources of magic power. They had searched through the entire Southern Empire and Northern Dynasty, but who else could solve this problem? Chinyu frowned. Heaven-Seek Pavilion. From the start, he had been wary of this mysterious influence. And after being reminded by Pill Crucible and Jiangli, he felt even more dread. If he could, he really didn't want to have any entanglements with Heaven-Seek Pavilion. But, it seemed that only they could solve the matter of the 5 elemental sources of magic power. After thinking about it again and again, Chinyu decided to give it a try. But before that, he had to first upgrade the level of his equipment. After carefully selecting War Bear and Xiang Ruyu's items, Chinyu took out 3 magic tools to refine. One was a small defensive shield, one was an offensive spear, and the last was a one-time consumable magic tool, the bloodstaining lock. Needless to say, the quality of the first 2 treasures was also the best among the gold core stage magic treasures. As for the bloodstaining lock, it could be considered a treasure of the demonic path. After being driven with blood, it could erupt with a terrifying killing intent. Daoist Wuyuan's bottles and jars. In the dark of night, Chinyu pinched his nose. He drank, swallowed, or breathed, causing his right index finger to become increasingly translucent, as if it were forged from beautiful jade. Of course, the charm of this finger could only be truly tasted when it touched his body. It wouldn't disappoint him. Gu Xingping took out several talismans. They weren't too strong, but if they were tossed out in a critical moment, they could temporarily resolve a crisis or be used to resist. Finally, the evolved purple-back blue-wing ants. No, from today onwards, they should be called the yin-yang twin ants. He placed them into the Imperial Spirit bag. But as he thought about it, Chinyu didn't take them all away. He ordered the Ant King to leave behind a portion of the ants to hide on the radiant redwood. This was also a precaution. He conveniently cut off a branch from the radiant redwood and placed it in the space where the little blue lamp was. Pouring magic power into the bamboo dragonfly, Chinyu looked around. After making sure he hadn't missed anything, he shot into the skies. In the blink of an eye, he vanished from sight.